Libraries were never meant to feel dangerous. In Edinburgh, they were meant to hold a different kind of silence. The old, disciplined quiet of paper, dust and winter light. They were places where rain tapped politely against high windows, where pensioners unfolded newspapers with the care of church linen, where students whispered as if history itself might object to being disturbed. A public library, especially one with archives beneath it and stone above it, was supposed to be one of the last innocent buildings in a city that had learned to sell nearly everything else. But innocence depends on what is hidden inside. And in the North Reading Room of the Morningside Public Library Archive, on a Thursday afternoon in late November, Fiona Gallagher found something that did not belong in any catalogue. It was not dramatic at first. No blood on the carpet, no scream from the stairwell, no threatening note pushed beneath a door. Only a thin sheet of translucent vellum, folded once and tucked into the back of a book that had not been borrowed in 9 years. The book was called Alkali-Silica Reaction and the Long-Term Behavior of Reinforced Concrete. It sat in the lower engineering section between 2 volumes on bridge fatigue and municipal drainage, in a row of shelves so neglected that even the cleaners rarely disturbed the dust there. Fiona had taken it down because its return slip was missing. That alone bothered her. Small irregularities bothered her. They always had. At 50, Fiona Gallagher had built a life around irregularities. She was head librarian and historical collections curator, which meant she spent her days protecting fragile things from careless hands. 19th century council ledgers, fire maps of old tenements, architects' notebooks with pencil lines fading at the edges, and pamphlets printed by committees that no longer existed. She trusted dates more than promises. She trusted ink more than memory. She trusted the dead more than the living because the dead rarely revised their statements. The archive occupied the oldest wing of the library, a stern Victorian structure of soot-darkened sandstone and narrow windows that looked toward a lane where delivery vans reversed badly in the mornings. Above the entrance, 2 carved owls watched the street with worn, blind patience. Below, under the public floors, lay storage rooms, sealed corridors, and a blocked-off coal passage that staff mentioned only when the heating failed or new volunteers asked too many questions. Fiona knew the building like a map drawn on the inside of her skull. She knew which step on the east staircase groaned, which radiator knocked when the temperature dropped, which drawer in the map cabinet needed to be lifted before it would open. She knew the habits of every regular patron with the same restrained affection some people reserved for family. That was why she had noticed when Alistair Kerr stopped coming. He had never been loud. Former city architect, early 60s, always in a charcoal overcoat that looked too thin for Edinburgh weather. He came every Tuesday and Friday, usually just after 10, with a leather satchel and a thermos he was not supposed to bring into the archive, but which Fiona had quietly chosen not to see. He requested books almost no one else touched. Concrete failure reports, planning appeals from the 1970s, bound minutes from building safety committees, drainage surveys of reclaimed ground near the old rail yards. He sat at the same desk beneath the tall window, worked for hours in small, precise handwriting, and left everything exactly as he found it. Then, 3 weeks earlier, he had vanished from the pattern. At first, Fiona assumed illness. People disappeared from libraries all the time for ordinary reasons. A fall, a daughter visiting from London, a bad chest infection, a winter depression. The city could swallow a person without malice. But on his last visit, Alistair had done something that returned to her now with uncomfortable clarity. He had stood at the issue desk longer than usual, one hand resting on the counter, the other closed around his library card. There had been rain on his shoulders and a grey pallor around his mouth. "Mrs. Gallagher," he had said softly. "Fiona is fine, Mr. Kerr." He had glanced toward the main doors, then toward the security camera above the return slot. "If a book comes back damaged, would you know?" She had almost smiled. "I would know before it reached the trolley." "No, I mean properly know." There had been something in his voice then. Not fear exactly. Something held flatter than fear, as if he had pressed it down for so long, it had become part of his manners. "I take damage to books very seriously," she had said. He had nodded, but not as if she had answered the question, as if she had confirmed something. After that, he had walked out into the rain, past the old owls over the entrance, and Fiona had not seen him again. Now she stood alone in the archive workroom with his favorite concrete book open before her, looking at the vellum sheet he had almost certainly hidden there. It was covered in hand-drawn markings, fine black lines, tiny circles, a grid that did not match the book's diagrams. Along one edge, someone had written a sequence of letters and numbers in ink, so sharp it looked engraved. C7, N4, K13. Returned to ground. Fiona did not touch it immediately. Experience had made her cautious. Old documents could tear under the weight of a breath. Strange documents could be worse. She put on cotton gloves from the conservation drawer and eased the vellum flat beneath the brass weights she used for curled maps. The sheet caught the overhead light and became almost invisible, except for the markings, which floated above the wooden table like a second, ghostly plan. She told herself it was probably a research aid. Architects used overlays, surveyors used overlays. Historians used them too, though usually not hidden inside technical books with no note, no accession number, and no reason to be there. The rain strengthened against the windows. Somewhere upstairs, a child laughed and was quickly hushed. Fiona reached for the book's return card, expecting to see the familiar stamp pattern. Instead, she found the sleeve empty. The missing slip was not the only irregularity. The old borrower's card, the brown one retained for pre-digital archive items, had been replaced by a blank piece of cream card cut to the same size. Not blank, she realized when she angled it toward the lamp. Punched through the card were tiny holes, arranged in 3 vertical columns. Fiona's first reaction was irritation. Someone had damaged library material. Then the irritation cooled into something less comfortable. The holes were too neat, too deliberate. They did not form Braille. They did not align with any filing system she knew, but they had rhythm, pattern, intention. She set the card beside the vellum and stood back. For a moment, nothing made sense. Then she noticed the title page of the concrete book. Under the printed subtitle, someone had drawn 4 small dots in pencil, nearly invisible unless the page was turned under light. Fiona leaned closer. They matched 4 holes on the card. Her pulse altered, not racing, only becoming more noticeable. She had spent decades reading traces left by careful people, a house name erased from a deed, a correction in a council ledger, a printer's mark hidden in the fold of a pamphlet. History rarely shouted. More often it waited for someone patient enough to notice where the silence had been arranged. Fiona opened the bottom drawer of her work table and removed a large laminated street map of central Edinburgh, the one used for local history tours. It showed the old town's ridges, the new town's disciplined grid, the tram line, the newer glass blocks rising beyond the old railway lands where cranes had recently become part of the skyline. The area had been advertised for months on buses and billboards as Northbank Quarter, a new financial and residential district of luxury flats, office towers, cafes, plazas, and carefully rendered trees. She had no reason to place the vellum over that map. No reason except the phrase at the bottom, "return to ground," and no reason except Alistair Kerr's last question. She moved the overlay across the map slowly, feeling faintly foolish. The vellum slid over roads and parks, over Princes Street gardens, over the dark line of the railway. The markings did not align. She shifted it north, then east, still nothing. Then the corner of the sheet met the printed edge of the Northbank Quarter development plan. The grid locked into place. Not approximately, exactly. The tiny circles on the vellum settled over 3 blocks of the new district. The thin black lines connected them beneath street level. The code along the edge, C7N4, K13, no longer looked abstract. It looked like a set of references, coordinates, structural points. Fiona lowered herself into the chair. Outside the workroom, the library continued as if nothing had happened. Pages turned. Rain fell. A printer jammed near the lending desk. Someone asked where the crime novels had been moved. But on the table before her, a hidden drawing inside an obscure book on concrete degradation had just marked specific support pillars beneath Edinburgh's newest development. Fiona stared at the overlay until the lines seemed to darken. Then she saw one more detail. At the very bottom of the vellum, written so small she had mistaken it for a scratch, were 5 words in Alistair Kerr's precise hand. Not if they opened. Fiona Gallagher's life had been built around avoiding unnecessary noise. She rose each morning at 6, before the neighbours in the flat below began their arguments and before the first buses sighed along the wet road outside. Her kitchen faced a narrow back green where bare branches scratched against the pale winter sky. She made tea in the same brown pot she had owned since her 30s, buttered one slice of toast and listened to the shipping forecast, though she had no connection to the sea beyond a childhood memory of cold holidays in Fife. There was comfort in things that returned in the correct order. The kettle, the toast, the grey scarf hanging on the second peg, the walk to the library past closed shop fronts, damp pavements and the smell of bread from the bakery on the corner.
Me.
The old woman who swept leaves from the doorway of the charity shop even when the wind made the effort pointless. The school children in oversized blazers moving in clusters, already half lit by their phones. Fiona liked routine, not because she lacked imagination, but because she knew how easily life could become ungovernable. Years earlier, before she became head librarian, before her name was printed on council letters and conservation reports, she had cared for her father through the long, narrowing corridors of dementia. He had been a surveyor once, a man of measurements and straight edges, able to glance at a room and tell whether a wall had moved since 1958. In the end, he had forgotten how to read a clock, but he still traced invisible plans on the bedsheet with one finger. Fiona had sat beside him in a rented care room in Leith and watched a precise mind lose its own internal architecture. After his death, she had turned even more fiercely toward records. Records did not wander out into traffic. Records did not forget daughters. Records did not mistake morning for evening. They could be damaged, misfiled, stolen, burned. But while they survived, they held. So she held too. At the library, people sometimes mistook her reserve for coldness. She was not cold. She simply believed that feelings, like rare documents, became more valuable when handled carefully. She remembered patrons' names and their ailments. She knew which lonely men came only to speak to another human being. She noticed when students stopped borrowing books before exams and when widowers began requesting cookery titles with embarrassed coughs. But she did not intrude. A library offered shelter without demanding confession. That was why Alistair Kerr had suited the place so well. He had never asked for sympathy. He had never performed eccentricity, as some former professionals did after retirement, dressing every silence in anecdotes of past authority. He came in, requested his materials, worked with a draftsman's calm, and left. The most personal thing Fiona knew about him was that he preferred pencils to pens and always returned them sharpened. After finding the vellum overlay, Fiona spent the next morning trying to persuade herself that the matter belonged in an ordinary category. A private research project, perhaps. An old architect's obsession with the new development. A protest in symbolic form. Edinburgh had plenty of people who disliked Northbank Quarter. It had risen too quickly from former railway land and service yards, all glass and polished stone, promising sustainable living and premium retail, while long-time residents wondered who exactly the city was being remade for. It was possible Alistair had simply been making a point, but ordinary explanations require ordinary behaviour, and hiding coded overlays in engineering books was not ordinary behaviour. Fiona placed the concrete volume in the restricted returns cabinet, rather than sending it back to the shelf. She logged it only as condition review pending, a phrase broad enough to mean almost anything and dull enough to discourage questions. Then she carried the vellum and punched card down to the conservation room, where the air was cooler and the walls were lined with acid-free boxes. She told no one, not Sheila at the lending desk, who would have worried aloud, not Marcus, the young digital services assistant, who would have suggested scanning it immediately and probably used the word ARG, which Fiona had no desire to hear. Not the council facilities manager, who still had not fixed the leak above Scottish genealogy. And certainly not the police, because what would she say? A retired architect may have hidden a transparent map in a library book. It points at pillars. Please take this seriously. She could already imagine the kind, exhausted expression of the constable who would write down her statement while thinking of more urgent calls. Instead, Fiona behaved as she always had. She checked facts. The first fact was simple. Alistair Kerr had not borrowed the concrete book under his own name. That should not have been possible. The library's archive collection still used a hybrid system for older technical materials, digital entry for current circulation, paper retention for items with historic annotations or specialist restrictions. Fiona opened the lending database and searched the item code. The screen showed a return date from 4 days earlier, processed through the after-hours Dropbox. Borrower, guest research access. Fiona frowned. Guest access was meant for visiting academics, temporary consultants, or researchers who had applied through the council heritage office. It required staff approval. She clicked into the record, expecting to find a scanned form. The attachment field was empty. She checked the staff initials. FG. For several seconds, she did not move. Her own initials sat there in the record, neat and undeniable, authorizing a transaction she had not made. A cold thread moved through her chest. The sensible explanation was clerical error. Someone had selected the wrong staff code. It happened. The system was old and badly designed by people who had never worked at a public desk during school holidays. Yet the date was a Monday, and Fiona remembered that Monday clearly because the boiler had failed and she had spent 2 hours arguing with maintenance while wearing her coat indoors. She had not authorized guest access. She printed the record, then immediately felt foolish for doing so, as if paper could make the violation more real. The printer's faint mechanical whine sounded too loud in the quiet room. At lunchtime, she walked past the staff kitchen without stopping. Someone had left a tin of shortbread beside the kettle. Marcus was laughing at something on his phone. Sheila asked whether Fiona wanted tea, and Fiona said she had too much to do. She returned to the archive and pulled Alistair's previous borrowing history. There were the expected books, foundation reports, old survey documents, volumes on concrete pathology, engineering failures in post-war public works. But in the final 2 months before he disappeared, his pattern had changed. Not dramatically enough for anyone else to notice. He had begun requesting books outside his usual range. Early cryptographic pamphlets, Victorian railway signalling manuals, a monograph on wartime map overlays, and a slim 1964 civil defense booklet on coded site markings. Fiona sat back slowly. He had not merely hidden something. He had prepared a method. The thought unsettled her more than the vellum itself. Panic could produce strange gestures. Fear could make a person irrational. But method meant time. It meant intent. It meant Alistair Kerr had known he might vanish from the library before his message was understood. Late that afternoon, the sky over Edinburgh darkened with the early bruised dimness of winter. The reading lamps made small golden islands across the archive tables. Fiona watched a doctoral student pack away a laptop, a retired teacher return a bundle of newspapers, and a young man in a navy suit asked too casually whether the archive kept planning records for Northbank Quarter. She told him public planning records were held through the city portal and selected historic files were available by appointment. He smiled without warmth. I was told someone here had been looking at them. Fiona's hand remained on the desk blotter. Many people look at planning records. Of course. He glanced past her toward the restricted shelves. I'm sure they do. He left without giving his name. Only after the doors closed behind him did Fiona realize he had not asked to see a single document. At closing time, she made her usual rounds, switching off lamps and checking chairs. But the familiar rooms no longer settled around her in the same way. The library seemed to contain too many corners, too many sightlines between shelves, too many places where a person could wait silently and leave no trace except displaced air. She returned to the conservation room and opened the box where she had placed the vellum. For a moment, she simply looked at it. Then she noticed something she had missed the day before. Along the upper margin, nearly lost among the drawn grid lines, was a faint indentation, not ink but pressure. Someone had written on another sheet above it, leaving a ghost impression in the vellum. Fiona angled it beneath the lamp and read the words that appeared only when the light struck from the side. 3 books, 3 foundations. Start where I stopped. By Friday morning, Fiona Gallagher had already decided there were 3 ways to mishandle a mystery. The first was to panic, which she had no intention of doing. Panic was theatrical. Panic knocked over chairs, raised voices, and invited people to dismiss you before they had listened. The second was to ignore the matter, which had become impossible the moment her own initials appeared on a lending record she had never authorized. The third was to treat fear as evidence. That, she knew, was the most dangerous mistake of all. So she made tea, unlocked the archive at 8:30, and began as she would have begun with any historical inquiry, with a table, a pencil, a clean notebook, and a list of verifiable facts. Outside, Edinburgh lay under a low ceiling of cloud. The pavements were dark from overnight rain, and the windows of the library held the colour of old pewter. Staff moved through the building in their familiar morning rhythm. Sheila counted the cash float at the lending desk. Marcus restarted the public computers, muttering at them like difficult pets. Somewhere in the children's room, a delivery of picture books thudded onto a trolley. Fiona closed the archive workroom door and wrote the date at the top of a page. Alistair Kerr, absent 3 weeks. Concrete degradation book returned after hours. False guest access record under FG initials. Vellum overlay aligns with Northbank Quarter map. Message, not if they open. Ghost text, 3 books, 3 foundations. Start where I stopped. She read the list twice. It looked absurd in her own handwriting. It also looked precise. The phrase 3 books suggested that the concrete volume was not the only carrier. If Alistair had hidden one overlay in one rarely borrowed book, he might have hidden others in similar places. Fiona opened his borrowing history again and filtered the final month before his disappearance. 21 items, too many to search casually. She narrowed the list to technical works requested more than once by Alistair and returned within the last 6 weeks. 3 titles emerged. The first was the concrete degradation volume already locked in the conservation cabinet. The second was Load Transfer in High-Rise Foundations, published in 1988 here by a specialist engineering press in Manchester. The third was a dry council-bound report from 1974. Subsurface conditions in the north, Leith rail yards and adjacent reclaimed ground. Fiona stared at the third title for a long moment. North Leith rail yards. Northbank Quarter had been built on land that promotional brochures described as underused urban space, a phrase broad enough to smooth over a century of oil, iron, ash, buried drainage, and the kind of compromised ground that older engineers discussed with a caution developers rarely advertised. She printed the call slips and descended into Stack Room 2. The public never saw that part of the library. It lay below the main reference floor, down a service stair with flaking green paint on the handrail. The air changed there. It became cooler, closer, touched by paper dust, metal shelving, and the faint mineral damp of old stone. Fluorescent tubes hummed overhead. Pipes ran along the ceiling like exposed veins. Fiona had always found comfort in the stacks. They were honest in their gloom. Nothing there pretended to be new or fashionable. The shelves held obsolete knowledge that, given enough time, became essential again. Drainage diagrams, court notices, road-widening objections, fire insurance plans, engineering manuals, parliamentary papers no one had requested since before the internet learned to overpromise. She found Load Transfer on a lower shelf, its blue cloth cover faded along the spine. The borrowing ribbon still hung from the back. She carried it to the inspection table and opened it carefully. No vellum. She checked the end papers, the dust jacket lining, the gap behind the spine, the catalogue card sleeve. Nothing. For nearly 20 minutes, she examined the book page by page, feeling a slow embarrassment grow in her chest. Perhaps she had invented pattern from coincidence. Perhaps Alistair's hidden message referred to 3 books he had been reading, not 3 objects. Perhaps the ghost text had been something else entirely, a pressure mark from an older note, and she was building a cathedral out of dust. Then she reached page 214. A diagram showed a simplified load path through reinforced concrete columns into pile foundations. Someone had underlined a caption in pencil, differential settlement under uneven curing conditions. The line was so faint, most readers would have missed it. Fiona leaned closer. At the edge of the page, where the paper met the binding, was a small triangular notch. Not torn, cut. She closed the book halfway and looked along the page block. The notch formed the first of several tiny cuts scattered through the volume. When she opened each marked page, she found another underlined phrase. Not enough to seem meaningful individually, but taken together, they made a trail. page 214, uneven curing, page 267, accelerated aggregate reaction, page 301, load redistribution beyond design tolerance, page 344, progressive failure rarely announces itself uniformly. Fiona copied them into her notebook. There was no coded overlay in the second book. There was a sentence assembled from borrowed authority, hidden inside an engineering text: uneven curing, accelerated reaction, load redistribution, progressive failure. She underlined the last two words and felt the room grow smaller. Progressive failure was not a protest slogan. It was not a vague objection to ugly buildings. It was a technical warning, the sort of phrase used when weakness did not remain local, when one compromised element placed increasing stress on another until the system itself became the danger. She turned back to the catalogue record. Load transfer had last been requested by Alistair Kerr 5 weeks before his disappearance. It had been returned by hand at 4:42 p.m. on a Tuesday. Staff initials SM Sheila McRae. That was ordinary. Sheila worked Tuesdays. Fiona almost felt relieved. Then she opened the digitized return note. The scanned image showed Sheila's initials, but the signature beneath the temporary access form was not Sheila's. It was a crude attempt at her handwriting, close enough at a glance, wrong in the pressure, wrong in the shape of the M. Fiona had spent too many years with manuscripts not to recognize a forgery. She sat very still. Upstairs, a door banged. The sound moved through the floorboards above her and faded into the hum of the lights. The third item, the 1974 subsurface report, was not on its shelf. That troubled her more than the forged signature. Council-bound reports did not wander. They were too dull to steal, too specific to misplace, too unattractive to casual readers. Fiona checked the adjacent shelves, then the returns trolley, then the oversized document trays where careless staff sometimes placed awkward volumes. Nothing. She searched the system. Status: available. Available meant it should have been in the building. She checked the manual movement log kept for local planning records. The last handwritten entry was from Alistair Kerr 6 weeks earlier. He had requested the report, signed it out to Reading Table 4, and returned it the same day. After that, no movement. Fiona looked at the empty space on the shelf where the report should have been and felt a strange sensation she had not expected. Not fear, not yet. Anger. Someone had entered her archive and altered its order. To anyone else, it might have seemed minor. A missing technical report, a false staff code, a forged signature, a stranger asking vague questions at closing. But Fiona's entire professional life rested on the belief that records mattered precisely because powerful people preferred disorder when order became inconvenient. She climbed back to the workroom with load transfer under one arm. Before returning to the computer, she stopped at table 4 in the public archive room. Alistair's table. It sat beneath the tall east window, where weak daylight fell across the wood in a pale rectangle. Fiona ran her gloved fingers along the underside, not expecting anything. It was an old habit from exhibition work. Check the surface, check the reverse, check the place no one displays. Her fingertips brushed paper. She crouched slowly. Taped beneath the table, set back from the edge where cleaners would not find it, was a narrow strip torn from a library request form. It had been folded lengthwise and flattened. Fiona removed it with a conservation spatula and carried it to the workroom. There were only 2 lines written on it. Not in Alistair's usual neat script, but in hurried block capitals. The map is not the warning. The warning is what they removed from the map. Fiona read the words once, then again. She placed the vellum overlay over the street map of Northbank Quarter, just as she had before. The marked pillars appeared immediately beneath 3 planned towers, C7, N4, K13. The map showed roads, entrances, landscaping, plazas, underground access points, even the public art installation scheduled for the opening ceremony. But as Fiona compared it with the old city planning images on her screen, she noticed a discrepancy. The public map displayed the 3 towers as separate foundation zones. The early planning map showed something else, a shared underground structural raft linking all 3 buildings beneath the surface, spanning what had once been a culverted watercourse running through the reclaimed ground. On the glossy public version, that connecting structure had vanished. Not physically, perhaps, only from the map. Fiona opened the oldest planning PDF she could access through the city portal and magnified the lower corner. The file was grainy, badly scanned, and partially obscured by a council approval stamp. Yet beneath the stamp, she could make out the name of the engineering consultancy that had signed off the foundation revision. Kerr and Weatherby Structural Partnership, Alistair's firm. Fiona's hand moved to her mouth before she could stop it. He had not simply been studying Northbank Quarter. He had once helped design it. At that moment, the archive phone rang. The sound cut through the workroom with such force that Fiona nearly dropped her pencil. She let it ring twice, then answered in the formal voice that years of public service had trained into her. Morningside Public Library Archive. Fiona Gallagher speaking. For a moment, there was only breathing. Not heavy, controlled. Close to the receiver. Then a man's voice, low and strained, said, "You found the second book." Fiona did not speak. The voice continued, "Don't trust the third record. It was taken after I left." Her grip tightened around the handset. "Mr. Kerr," she whispered, but the line had already gone dead. The line remained silent in Fiona Gallagher's hand long after the caller had gone. She did not replace the receiver immediately. She listened to the emptiness, to the faint electrical hush that followed a broken connection, as if a voice might return from inside it. The archive workroom seemed to withdraw around her. The lamp, the map, the vellum overlay, the open engineering book, the pencil beside her notebook. All of it remained exactly where it had been, yet everything had shifted. Until that moment, Alistair Kerr had been absent. Now he was present and unreachable. Fiona set the receiver down with care. A careless movement felt dangerous, as though the library itself had become a room full of sleeping mechanisms. She wrote the call time in her notebook. 14:17. Unknown male caller claimed she had found second book. Warned third record was taken after he left. Possible Alistair Kerr. Possible, she underlined the word once. A cautious person did not turn a voice into proof simply because fear wanted it to be proof. A cautious person checked the call log. The archive phone was old, fixed to the council system with a small display that stored the last few incoming numbers when it chose to work. Fiona pressed the recall button. The display blinked, then showed number withheld. Of course. Outside the workroom, the library had entered its afternoon lull. The lunch hour visitors had gone. The school children had not yet arrived. Rain slid down the high windows in thin, nervous lines. From the public reading room came the soft drag of chair legs and the dry flutter of newspaper pages. Fiona stood and locked the workroom door. It was not something she usually did during opening hours. The archive was controlled, not secretive. Patrons had to request materials, but the workroom itself remained accessible to staff. Turning the key now felt like crossing a line. A small line, perhaps. A bureaucratic line. But Fiona had spent her life respecting small lines because she understood that large disasters often began when people decided small rules no longer mattered. She returned to the table and looked again at the evidence before her. 3 books, 3 foundations. Start where I stopped. The first book had held the overlay. The second had held a sequence of technical phrases that pointed to progressive structural failure. The third record, according to the caller, had been taken after Alistair left. Not misplaced. Taken. The missing 1974 subsurface report had become more than a missing volume. It was now an absence with a date attached to it. Fiona opened the archive movement logs again and checked every item removed from Stack Room 2 in the last 6 weeks. She was systematic, almost severe in her attention. Panic moved quickly, evidence moved slowly. There were 27 entries. Family history boxes, a bundle of tramway maps, 2 architectural drawings for a demolished school, minutes from a housing committee, a sanitation survey from 1911. Nothing else from the North Leith rail yards. Then she looked at the environmental control log. It was not connected to circulation. It recorded staff access to secure storage rooms by keycard, a dull compliance requirement introduced after a minor theft of antique postcards 5 years earlier. Fiona had disliked the system from the beginning. It was unreliable, badly maintained, and humiliating to long-serving staff who had protected public collections before the consultants who installed it were born. Now she was grateful for it. She searched the access records for Stack Room 2. Her own card appeared dozens of times. Sheila's appeared twice. Marcus's appeared once, when he had helped move a scanner. The facility's contractor appeared for a maintenance inspection. And there, at 1936, on a Wednesday evening, 2 weeks earlier, was a staff code she did not recognize. Temp 411. Fiona stared at it. The library closed at 7 on Wednesdays. The archive closed at 6. No temporary staff had been authorized in Stack Room 2 that month. She printed the log, then hesitated. Printing left traces, but not printing left her with nothing except a screen someone else could alter. She made 2 copies and placed one inside the conservation file for an unrelated 19th century atlas. A hiding place so boring, it felt almost elegant. Then she went upstairs. At the staff desk, Sheila McRae was repairing a torn paperback with tape she should not have been using, though Fiona chose not to comment. Sheila was 62, broad-shouldered, kind, and incapable of whispering when annoyed. Her reading glasses rested on a chain around her neck. "Sheila," Fiona said, keeping her voice low. "Do you remember signing out load transfer in high-rise foundations for a guest researcher last month?" Sheila looked over the glasses. "Sounds thrilling, no. There's a form with your initials. I initial plenty of things I regret, but I'd remember that title. Why? Because I'd have asked if it was a punishment." Fiona almost smiled. Almost. Sheila's expression changed. "What's happened?" "Possibly nothing. That means something." Fiona glanced toward the public area. A man in a waxed coat was reading The Scotsman near the window. A mother helped a child find a dinosaur book. Marcus was explaining password reset procedures to a student with large headphones. "Did anyone come in after closing 2 Wednesdays ago?" Fiona asked. Sheila thought for a moment. 2 Wednesdays ago. Was that the night the alarm company sent someone?" Fiona's attention sharpened. "What alarm company?" "The council contractor, or I assume. I was leaving late because the lift jammed again. There was a man at the side entrance with a lanyard. Said he was checking the basement sensors after the false alarm." "We didn't have a false alarm." Sheila's face tightened. "Didn't we?" "No. Well, he had a key card." "What did he look like?" Sheila lowered the paperback. 40s maybe, neat, not big, grey suit under a dark coat, not a tradesman, more like one of those corporate types who use the word compliance as a weapon. "Did he give a name?" "I didn't ask. He had the lanyard." I was tired. There was shame in the last sentence, and Fiona felt a pang of guilt for causing it. "You did nothing wrong," she said. Sheila did not appear reassured. "Fiona, has something been stolen?" Fiona considered lying. It would have been kinder in the short term, but kindness, she had learned, could become another form of concealment if used too loosely. "A council subsurface report is missing," she said. Sheila blinked. "Someone broke in to steal a soil report?" "Possibly. That's the saddest crime I've ever heard of." "It may not be sad." Sheila studied her for a long second. "You're frightened." Fiona looked away first. Sheila did not press her. Instead, she reached beneath the desk and pulled out the staff incident binder. If anyone came through the side entrance, the external camera might have caught him. Council only keeps footage 30 days unless requested. Who can request it? You can. Head librarian. Fiona had known this. Still, hearing it spoken made the responsibility heavier. By 4 o'clock, she had submitted a formal request for the side entrance footage. She worded it carefully. Unverified after-hours contractor access, potential collections audit issue. Not theft, not conspiracy, not Alistair Kerr. She used the language institutions understood, because institutions often refused to hear danger until it arrived dressed as procedure. Then she returned to the archive and began searching for Alistair outside the library. She did not use social media. She disliked its appetite for fragments. Instead, she started with public records, professional registers, old planning committee minutes, archived consultancy websites, newspaper references, and companies' house filings. Alistair Kerr had been exactly what he appeared to be, a structural architect turned partner in a small Edinburgh firm. Kerr and Weatherby Structural Partnership dissolved 7 years earlier after being absorbed into a larger consultancy. That larger consultancy had later been contracted on early-stage foundation analysis for Northbank Quarter. Fiona printed nothing yet. She wrote names by hand. Wetherby, Northbank Development Group, Cairnwell Urban Properties, Edinburgh City Regeneration Board. The names formed a dry chain of public respectability. Committees, partnerships, limited companies, nothing dramatic, nothing that would trouble a headline. Yet the further she followed them, the more often one company appeared in the background. Cairnwell Urban Properties, the private development firm behind Northbank Quarter. Its website was polished and bloodless. Architectural renderings, rooftop gardens, sustainable urban living. A quote from a managing director about trust. Fiona paused on the word. Trust, she thought, was often what people demanded when they had misplaced the records. Near 5:30, the council security office emailed a response. Footage would be reviewed in due course. Due course, in council language, could mean anything from an hour to never. Fiona was preparing to call them when Marcus knocked on the workroom door. "You've got someone asking for you downstairs," he said. Fiona closed her notebook. "Who?" "Didn't say. Older woman. Says it's about Mr. Kerr." The name seemed to remove the warmth from the room. Fiona followed Marcus down the main staircase, past the portraits of former provosts and the display case of local school projects. The library lights had come on against the early dark. Outside, headlights smeared across the wet street. The woman stood near the returns desk, holding a wool hat in both hands. She was perhaps in her late 60s, small, with silver hair pinned neatly back, and a face shaped by the exhaustion of someone who had recently begun sleeping badly. Her coat was buttoned wrong, one button slipped into the wrong hole. "Mrs. Gallagher?" she asked. "Yes." The woman looked toward the entrance, then back at Fiona. "My name is Morag Kerr." Fiona felt the library recede behind her. "Alistair's wife?" Morag nodded once. Her mouth trembled, but her voice stayed controlled. "He said if I became worried, I should come here. He said not to go to the council. Not first." Fiona guided her to the small consultation room beside local history. It had frosted glass, 2 chairs, a table, and a framed print of Arthur's seat in summer light. Sheila looked at Fiona as they passed, but said nothing. Inside the room, Morag Kerr sat with her handbag on her knees, as if prepared to leave at any moment. "When did you last see your husband?" Fiona asked gently. Morag swallowed. 18 days ago. "Have you reported him missing?" "No." Fiona tried not to react. "Why not?" "Because he told me not to, unless a body was found." The sentence landed quietly and terribly. Morag opened her handbag and removed a sealed envelope, creased from being handled many times. On the front, in Alistair Kerr's precise handwriting, was Fiona's full name. "He left this in the airing cupboard," Morag said, "behind the towels. I found it this morning." Fiona did not take it at once. "What did he tell you?" Morag's eyes filled, but the tears did not fall. "He said years ago he signed something he did not fully understand. Then later he understood it too well. He said people would die if the opening went ahead." Outside the consultation room, the library doors opened and closed. A gust of cold air moved through the building. Voices rose briefly, then softened. Fiona looked at the envelope. For the first time since she had found the vellum, the mystery no longer felt like a puzzle left by a frightened man. It felt like a clock. She broke the seal. Inside was a single photograph of Alistair Kerr standing beside an unfinished concrete pillar in an underground car park. On the back, he had written a date, a pillar code, and 6 words. "If they deny this, find Moira." The name on the back of the photograph changed the air in the room. Morag Kerr watched Fiona read it, her hand still folded around the wool hat in her lap. For a moment, neither woman spoke. Outside the frosted glass, the library continued with its ordinary evening sounds. A stamp pressed into an ink pad, a printer waking with a reluctant cough, the muffled scrape of a trolley wheel catching on uneven floorboards. The familiar noises seemed to come from another life. Fiona turned the photograph over again. Alistair Kerr stood beneath harsh construction lighting, one hand raised toward a concrete pillar. He was thinner than Fiona remembered, his face hollowed by worry, but there was no mistaking him. Behind him, the underground space stretched into shadow, unfinished and ribbed with temporary supports. Red spray paint marked the pillar at shoulder height. A hairline crack ran down one side of it, so fine that at first Fiona thought it was a scratch on the print. Then she saw the second crack, And the third, they branched from the top of the pillar like dark veins. The code written on the back was C7, one of the marks from the vellum. Fiona placed the photograph flat on the consultation table and looked at Morag. Who is Moira? Morag pressed her lips together. I don't know. Did your husband ever mention her? Not by that name. At least, not to me. Fiona kept her voice low. Mrs. Kerr, I need you to think carefully. Did Alistair have colleagues, former assistants, anyone connected to Northbank Quarter whose first name was Moira? Morag looked toward the frosted glass as if the answer might be waiting there. There was a woman years ago, someone from one of the testing firms. I remember because she phoned the house once, very late. Alistair went into the hall to speak to her. I heard him say, "You should never have signed that." Then he saw me and lowered his voice. When was that? Before he retired properly, maybe 8 years ago, maybe more. Do you remember her surname? Morag shook her head, frustrated by her own memory. No, he never introduced work people if he could avoid it. He said it was kinder to keep one world from contaminating the other. Fiona understood that sentence more than she wanted to. She studied the photograph again. It was not a professional image. The angle was slightly tilted. The flash had reflected off damp concrete. It had the hurried look of something taken before someone could be seen taking it. The date on the back was only 6 weeks old. Alistair had been inside Northbank Quarter after public access should have been restricted. He had photographed a damaged support pillar, and then he had hidden the evidence through books. Fiona felt the shape of the investigation alter. Until now, she had been decoding a message about documents and maps. The photograph was different. It was physical, immediate. A piece of the actual building had entered the library in her hand. She asked Morag whether Alistair had left anything else. Only instructions, Morag said. What kind of instructions? He said if anyone came asking for his old project files, I was to say we'd cleared them out years ago. He said not to answer calls from withheld numbers. He said if I saw a grey car outside the house more than twice, I should stay with my sister in Dunfermline. Have you? Morag's silence answered before she did. There's been a car, she said. Not always the same one, but often enough. Fiona looked at the woman across from her, a wife who had been told not to report her husband missing unless a body appeared. A woman carrying an envelope from an airing cupboard into a public library because her husband had trusted books more than offices. For a second, Fiona felt an impulse to step back from all of it, to call the police, to call the council, to hand the photograph to someone with a badge, a title, a legal department, anything larger than herself. She had spent years defending institutional procedure because procedure at its best protected people from impulse and abuse. But Alistair's warning had been specific. Not the council, not first. That did not mean the council was corrupt. Fiona refused to leap that far. It meant Alistair believed the normal channels had failed him, or would expose him. A belief was not proof, but it was enough to demand care. She asked Morag for permission to make a copy of the photograph. Morag hesitated. He said original only. Fiona paused. He wrote that? No, he told me once, not about this exactly. About evidence. He said copies can save you, but originals can condemn someone. Fiona accepted the correction. It was the kind of thing an architect would understand. A copy was useful until the weight had to be carried. She did not scan the photograph. Instead, she wrote down every visible detail. Date, pillar code, background markings, lighting, crack pattern, red spray paint, Alistair's clothing, the apparent level of construction completion. She drew the crack as accurately as she could in her notebook. Her hands were steady, but only because she forced them to be. When she was done, she slid the photograph back into its envelope. Take this with you, she said. Morag looked startled. I thought you'd need it. I need to know it exists, but if it stays here and someone comes looking, it may disappear with the rest. Morag's eyes moved to the door. You think someone will come? I think someone already has. The admission hung between them. At the main desk, Sheila was pretending not to watch. Marcus had gone to help a patron with the copier. The rain had eased outside, leaving the street slick and black beneath the lamps. Fiona walked Morag to a staff exit rather than the front doors. She did not say why, and Morag did not ask. Before leaving, Morag turned back. He wasn't a brave man, she said, almost apologetically. Not the way people mean it. He hated confrontation. He would change dentists rather than complain about pain. But when he started going through those old papers, something changed. He became quieter. Not secretive exactly. Heavy. As if he had found a room in his own life he'd never opened before. Fiona thought of her father tracing invisible plans on a bedsheet. Sometimes, quiet people are the only ones who notice when the walls move, she said. Morag gave a small, broken nod and stepped into the wet evening. Fiona locked the staff door behind her. For several seconds she remained there, listening. No footsteps in the lane, no car door, no raised voice. Only the distant traffic and the low shudder of the old heating pipes. Then she returned to the archive with a decision already forming. She needed to find Moira. The name was common enough to be a problem and uncommon enough to be a thread. Fiona began with the early Northbank Quarter planning documents and worked backward through consultant reports, environmental assessments, materials testing summaries, geotechnical appendices, and council procurement notices. The public files were incomplete in the way public files often were. Not empty, not obviously altered, but softened by missing appendices and broken links. Some documents were marked superseded, others had file names that suggested attachments no longer available. By 7:15, the library had closed to the public. Sheila came to the archive doorway with her coat on and a look that said she had already decided to interfere. "I'm not leaving you alone in here," Sheila said. "You have a bus. I have another bus after that. It may be a long evening. I've had marriages shorter than council audits." Fiona wanted to refuse, but fatigue and fear had begun to thin her pride. She let Sheila in and locked the door behind her. Together, they worked through names. Fiona read procurement tables while Sheila cross-checked archived press releases. The word Moira appeared first in a minute document from a technical review meeting held 9 years earlier. Moira Lennox, Materials Compliance Officer, employed by Caledon Testing Services. Fiona whispered the name once, testing its weight. Moira Lennox had signed off on preliminary concrete sample verification for Phase 1 of Northbank Quarter. Her name appeared in 3 early documents, then vanished. No later reports, no public biography, no photograph on the company website. Caledon Testing Services had since been acquired by a multinational quality assurance firm with offices in Glasgow, Aberdeen, and Manchester. Sheila found the next trace in a local news archive. "Listen to this," she said. Fiona looked up. Sheila read from the screen. Former materials officer criticizes private certification culture after leaving construction testing sector. That's from 6 years ago. There's a quote from a Moira Lennox. What does she say? Sheila squinted. When commercial pressure enters safety certification, silence becomes part of the product. The sentence settled into the room. Fiona came around to look at the article. It was short, buried in a regional business section, accompanied by a stock photograph of scaffolding. Moira Lennox had reportedly left the sector after what the article called professional disagreements. There was no mention of Northbank Quarter, but at the bottom, in a detail most readers would skip, Fiona saw that Moira had later taken a post with a small charity providing technical advice to residents in unsafe housing disputes. The charity's office was in Leith, not far from the new district, not far from the ground Alistair had been studying. Fiona wrote down the address. Sheila folded her arms. "You're going tomorrow. I have to speak with her." "No, you have to decide whether you're a librarian or a detective." Fiona turned from the screen, "and I am a librarian. That's what worries me. Librarians think finding information is the same as being safe with it." The words stung, because they were fair. Before Fiona could answer, the archive phone rang again. Both women froze. The sound filled the room, sharp and impossible after closing. Fiona let it ring once, twice. Sheila whispered, "Don't." Fiona answered. For a moment there was only static. Then a voice spoke. Not Alistair's this time. A woman's voice, older, roughened by cigarettes or weather, and very close to panic. "Mrs. Gallagher." Fiona straightened. "Who is this?" "You've been looking for me." Sheila's eyes widened. Fiona gripped the receiver. Moira Lennox. The woman inhaled sharply, as if hearing her name spoken aloud confirmed a danger she had hoped to avoid. "Do not come to the office," Moira said. "They were there this afternoon." "Who?" "I don't know what they call themselves now. Consultants, security, men with clean shoes and no questions on paper." Fiona's pulse beat once, hard. Moira continued, faster. "If Alistair sent you, then he trusted you. But listen carefully. The missing report won't help unless you find what was removed from it." "The old subsurface report?" "No," Moira said. "The core samples." Fiona looked at Sheila. "What core samples?" The line crackled. Moira's voice dropped almost to a whisper. "The ones they said were destroyed, they weren't. Alistair hid the location in the borrower's card." Then beneath the static, Fiona heard a sound that did not come from the phone. A firm knock at the archive door. 3 times. Measured, patient, official. The knock came again. 3 measured strikes against the archive door, not loud enough to alarm the building, not soft enough to be mistaken for accident. A sound made by someone who expected to be admitted. Fiona Gallagher stood with the phone pressed to her ear, looking at Sheila across the workroom table. The vellum overlay lay beneath its brass weights. The engineering volume sat open beside Fiona's notebook. On the computer screen, Moira Lennox's name glowed in the dim after-hours light, like a fact that had just become dangerous. On the line, Moira whispered, "Do not answer that if you're alone." Fiona did not reply. Sheila's face had lost its usual warmth. Her coat was still buttoned, her handbag over one shoulder. But she had become completely still, like a woman listening for movement in a house she had thought was empty. A third knock came. Then a man's voice through the door. "Mrs. Gallagher, it's Daniel Price from Cairnwell Compliance Services. We spoke with reception earlier. We're here regarding unauthorized access to proprietary development documents." Fiona closed her eyes for half a second. Cairnwell, not the council, not the police, not the alarm contractor, the developer. The voice continued, calm and polished. "We understand this is an inconvenient time. We only need a short conversation." Moira's breathing tightened in the receiver. "Listen to me," she said. "They will sound reasonable. They are paid to sound reasonable. If they mention corporate espionage, say nothing. If they ask for borrower records, say nothing. If they know my name, leave the building." The line clicked. Moira was gone. Fiona lowered the handset slowly into its cradle. Sheila mouthed, "What now?" Fiona looked around the workroom. Years of institutional habit argued with every nerve in her body. The correct procedure, in an ordinary dispute, would be to open the door, ask for identification, refuse improper requests, and document the interaction. But the situation had already moved beyond ordinary. Someone had forged access records. Someone had entered Stackroom 2 after hours. Someone had removed a subsurface report. And now 2 men from a company connected to Northbank Quarter were outside the archive at night, using language that sounded legal enough to intimidate and vague enough to deny. Fiona gathered the vellum overlay, the punched borrower's card, and her handwritten notes. She slid them into an acid-free folder, then into the false bottom of a map storage box labeled Parish Boundary Revisions, 1891 to 1903. Sheila watched, wide-eyed. "You've done that before? I have worked with donors' families." "That explains nothing and everything." Fiona closed the box and placed it among 6 others on the shelf. Then she crossed to the door. "Fiona," Sheila whispered, "it's still my archive." She unlocked the door but kept the chain latch in place, an old security feature no one used except when delivering valuable collections. The gap revealed 2 men in dark coats standing beneath the corridor light. The first was in his 40s, narrow-faced, clean-shaven, with a lanyard tucked too neatly inside his coat. The second stood half a step behind him, heavier, silent, eyes moving past Fiona into the room. The first man smiled as if arriving early for a meeting. "Mrs. Gallagher, thank you. Daniel Price." He held up an identification card. It showed his photograph, Cairnwell Compliance Services, and a job title so broad it meant nothing. Risk Liaison Consultant. Fiona did not remove the chain. "The library is closed," she said. "I appreciate that. We've been asked to make contact promptly due to a serious data security concern." "By whom?" Our client. And your client is Northbank Development Group, in partnership with Cairnwell Urban Properties. He spoke the names carefully, giving each its proper weight. Fiona had heard similar voices at council meetings, men who believed authority could be manufactured through diction. This is a public library archive, Fiona said. If your client has a legal request, it should be submitted to the council in writing. Daniel Price's smile did not change. Of course. And that process is underway. Tonight, we're hoping simply to prevent further mishandling of sensitive proprietary materials. What materials? Engineering documents removed from a secure commercial environment and placed into public circulation. Fiona let the silence sit between them. His eyes flicked toward the chain. We have reason to believe a former contractor, Mr. Alistair Kerr, used this library to distribute confidential documents. From behind Fiona, Sheila made the smallest sound. Daniel Price heard it. His gaze sharpened. May we come in? No. The answer surprised even Fiona with its simplicity. Price tilted his head. Mrs. Gallagher, I should be clear. This may become a police matter. Then the police may speak to me. We'd prefer to avoid that, for everyone's sake. Borrower confidentiality is important, naturally, but where corporate espionage and stolen technical files are involved, different obligations may apply. Fiona felt the old reflex to comply rise in her, not because she trusted him, but because institutions trained people to fear the wrong breach. A librarian could be disciplined for mishandling records. A public servant could be suspended for refusing cooperation. A woman of 50, with a quiet flat and a modest pension, did not casually invite legal letters from development companies with glass offices and barristers on retainer. But fear, she reminded herself, was not evidence. Neither was authority. If you want records, she said, apply through the council's legal department. Price's smile thinned. We're aware that several archive items have already been tampered with. Are you reporting damage to library property? I'm reporting concern. Then I'll note your concern. The heavier man behind him shifted his weight. For the first time, Fiona looked directly at him. He had the blank face of someone trained not to appear threatening while standing exactly where threat was most useful. Price leaned slightly closer to the gap. Mrs. Gallagher, I don't think you understand the position you may be putting yourself in. Mr. Kerr is not a whistleblower. He is a troubled man with a documented grievance against several former employers. He has taken material out of context. If you assist him, you may expose yourself and this library to consequences you are not equipped to manage. There it was. Not an accusation, a shape prepared for later use. Troubled man, grievance, out of context. Words that could make evidence look like obsession before anyone examined it. Fiona thought of Morag Kerr holding her hat in both hands. She thought of Alistair beneath the construction lights, pointing toward cracks in a pillar. She thought of Moira saying commercial pressure made silence part of the product. I'm equipped to manage library procedure, Fiona said, and library procedure says you leave now. For the first time, Price's expression faltered, only slightly. Enough. He slid a business card through the gap. It fell to the floor just inside the door. If Mr. Kerr contacts you again, he said, or if Ms. Lennox attempts to involve you in her allegations, call that number before you do anything regrettable. Fiona felt Sheila stiffen behind her. Moira had warned her, if they know my name, leave the building. Price stepped back. Good evening, Mrs. Gallagher. The two men walked down the corridor without haste. Fiona listened until their footsteps faded. She waited longer still. Then she closed the door, locked it fully, and turned toward Sheila. Sheila's face was pale. They knew Moira. Yes. They knew we knew Moira. Possibly. Fiona, I know. The calm she had been holding began to crack at the edges. Not visibly, perhaps, but she felt it, a tremor beneath the surface, a delayed recognition that the boundary between inquiry and danger had been crossed while she was busy taking notes. They did not leave immediately. Fiona insisted first on securing the materials. She moved the map box to a lower shelf, then changed her mind and placed the folder inside an archival tube containing a reproduction street plan of 1884. Sheila watched without comment, understanding now that hiding documents had become less absurd than leaving them where they belonged. Before they exited, Fiona checked the corridor. Empty. The library after closing was a different building. Without patrons, it became all angles and echoes. Their footsteps followed them down the stairs. Emergency lights glowed green above doors. The old stone seemed to hold the day's cold in its walls. At the staff entrance, Sheila peered through the narrow glass panel into the lane. "I don't see them." Fiona looked past her. Rain misted under the security light. Bins stood against the wall. A delivery bay shutter was pulled down across the opposite building. No men, no grey car. They left together anyway, walking quickly but not running. Sheila insisted on accompanying Fiona to the bus stop, though her own route went the other way. The city was busy enough to feel normal and empty enough to feel watched. Traffic hissed along wet roads. A group of students laughed too loudly outside a pub. Somewhere near the junction, a cyclist shouted at a taxi. At the bus stop, Sheila took Fiona's arm. "Stay at mine tonight." "No, that wasn't a suggestion. I need my notes. You need to be alive to read them." The bluntness cut through Fiona's resistance. For a moment, she was too tired to answer. Then her phone vibrated in her coat pocket. She rarely gave out her mobile number. Staff had it. Her sister in Stirling had it. The council had it because every employee's privacy eventually surrendered to forms. Unknown callers did not usually find her there. The screen showed no number. Sheila saw her face change. "Don't answer." But the vibration stopped before Fiona could decide. A voicemail notification appeared. They stood under the bus shelter while rain ticked softly on the plastic roof. Fiona pressed play and held the phone between them. At first, there was only street noise, wind, a passing vehicle. Then Alistair Kerr's voice came through, closer than before but weaker, as though he was speaking while walking. "Fiona, if this reaches you, they've connected the library to Moira. I'm sorry, I thought the books would give you time." There was a pause, a breath. Something metallic clanged in the background. The borrower's card is not a code for a document. It's a coordinate system. Use the holes against the 1974 survey grid, not the modern map. The core samples are still under the city because moving them would have proved they existed. His voice broke briefly, then steadied. C7 is already failing. N4 is worse. K13 is hidden behind temporary cladding. They'll open the district before the commission can act, unless someone outside the council sees the evidence. Another sound entered the recording. Footsteps, not his. Alistair whispered the final words so quietly Fiona had to hold the phone closer. "Do not trust Weatherby." The message ended. A bus pulled up in front of them, brakes sighing, doors opening onto yellow light and warm air. Neither woman moved. Across the road, beneath the shadow of a closed estate agency, a man in a dark coat stood watching them with a phone held loosely at his side. The man across the road did not move when the bus doors opened. He stood beneath the unlit sign of the estate agency, half sheltered by the doorway, his dark coat blending into the wet glass behind him. The phone in his hand was angled down, not raised, not openly filming, but Fiona knew by then that danger did not always announce itself with obvious gestures. Sometimes it wore clean shoes. Sometimes it waited under a shopfront and allowed ordinary life to pass between itself and the person it was watching. The bus driver looked at them through the steamed windscreen. Sheila touched Fiona's sleeve. "On," she said. Fiona obeyed. It was not courage that moved her. Courage would have suggested a choice. This was simpler and older, the instinct to get behind doors, among witnesses, inside light. She climbed onto the bus with Sheila close behind her, tapped her card, and moved down the aisle without looking back. The heat inside smelled of damp wool, old upholstery, and someone's chips wrapped in paper. A teenager with earbuds leaned against the window. An elderly man in a flat cap held a folded shopping bag on his knees. Two nurses in dark uniforms spoke softly near the rear. The city outside slid into streaks of orange lamps and black rain. Only when the bus pulled away did Fiona allow herself to glance through the rear window. The man had stepped out from the doorway. He was watching the bus leave. Sheila sat beside Fiona and kept her voice low. "You're coming to mine." Fiona looked down at her hands. They were clenched around her bag so tightly the leather had creased beneath her fingers. "My notes are at the library." "Your notes are hidden in a place only a madly overqualified librarian would choose. They'll survive the night. The borrower's card isn't. Sheila stared at her. Fiona closed her eyes briefly. In the rush after Daniel Price's visit, she had hidden the vellum and written notes, moved the folder, checked the door, taken the business card from the floor. But the punched borrower's card, the small cream rectangle that Alistair said was not a document code but a coordinate system, had remained inside the conservation envelope on the work table. She could see it now with painful clarity, lying beside the lamp beneath the dustless circle left by a brass weight. Sheila muttered something unrepeatable under her breath. "Can we go back?" Fiona asked. "No. Sheila, no, if they watched us leave, they may be waiting to see if you return, and if they're not, they will be soon." Fiona hated that Sheila was right. She hated too that the library was no longer the safest place to keep a truth. The thought felt like a betrayal of everything she believed. The bus turned toward Marchmont, windows rattling softly. Fiona replayed Alistair's voicemail in her mind. Use the holes against the 1974 survey grid, not the modern map. The missing subsurface report had contained that grid, or some version of it. Without the report, the card was only a pattern. With the report, it might reveal where the core samples were hidden, and the report was gone. But there were always copies. That was the first law of archives. Not every copy survived where it should, but somewhere in a box, a drawer, a basement, or a forgotten office, bureaucracy left its shed skins behind. Fiona opened her eyes. The city archives may have the 1974 survey. Sheila gave her a sharp look. "We are not going to the city archives tonight." "I know. Do you?" "I said tonight." Sheila turned away, displeased but not surprised. They got off near Bruntsfield, taking a longer route through quieter side streets because Sheila insisted. Her flat occupied the upper floor of a narrow tenement with a blue door and a stairwell that smelled faintly of furniture polish and old stone. Inside, the rooms were warm and crowded with books in a way Fiona had always found both comforting and alarming. Sheila's books did not stand in disciplined order. They leaned, sprawled, colonized tables and windowsills, crime novels mixed with cookery books. A biography of Mary, Queen of Scots, sat beneath a manual on plumbing repairs. Sheila locked the door, bolted it, and pulled the curtains closed. "You'll have tea," she said. It was not a question. Fiona stood in the sitting room, still wearing her coat. Her mind refused to settle. Every object in Sheila's flat seemed too domestic for what had just occurred. The knitted blanket over the chair, the framed photograph of Sheila's grandchildren in school uniforms, the ceramic cat on the mantelpiece with one chipped ear. People built homes as arguments against chaos. Fiona suddenly saw how fragile those arguments were. Her mobile phone sat silent in her palm. Do not trust Weatherby. The name had been inside the records from the beginning. Kerr and Weatherby Structural Partnership. Alistair and Weatherby. A former partner, perhaps. A colleague. Someone who had signed drawings, revised foundation plans, understood the old survey grid, and knew enough to frighten a man like Alistair into hiding messages inside library books. Sheila returned with tea and a plate of biscuits that neither of them touched. "Tell me who Weatherby is," Sheila said. Fiona sat finally. "Alistair's old business partner. I don't know much more." "First name?" "I saw only the firm name." Sheila reached for her laptop. "Then we do what librarians do before detectives get themselves killed. Research? Gossip with citations." Under other circumstances, Fiona might have smiled. For the next hour, they searched through old business directories, archived professional pages, cached fragments of consultancy websites, and planning committee minutes. Sheila was faster than Fiona expected, impatient with dead links, ruthless with search terms. At 9:30, they found him. Graham Weatherby, chartered structural engineer, former partner at Kerr and Weatherby Structural Partnership, later appointed as senior technical director at a larger consultancy that advised on early Northbank Quarter phases. After that, he had moved again, into a role described as Independent Development Assurance Advisor. Independent, Fiona had learned, was one of those words that meant everything until money stood too close to it. Graham Weatherby appeared in photographs as a handsome man in his late 50s, silver hair, careful smile, expensive glasses. He had given talks on sustainable redevelopment, urban resilience, and the need to reduce delays caused by what he called legacy caution in British construction culture. Sheila read the phrase aloud with contempt. Legacy caution. That means old people saying bridges shouldn't fall down. Fiona did not answer. She had found another mention of him, this time in a council regeneration newsletter from 3 years earlier. Weatherby stood in a high-visibility vest beside representatives from Canwell Urban Properties and the City Regeneration Board. Behind them, Northbank Quarter rose from a pit of concrete and steel. The caption identified him as technical assurance consultant for the project. Not former, not peripheral, current enough, Fiona enlarged the image. There were 5 people in the photograph. She recognized no one else at first. Then she saw the man on the far left. Narrow face, neat posture, the same restrained expression he had worn outside the archive door. Daniel Price. His caption was not compliance consultant. It read, Strategic Risk Manager, Canwell Urban Properties. Fiona felt Sheila lean closer. He lied about his role, Sheila said. He softened it. That's lying with cufflinks. Fiona looked at the photograph for a long time. Alistair had warned her not to trust Weatherby, but Weatherby appeared publicly connected to the very assurance process that would determine whether Northbank Quarter could open. If there were structural flaws, and if he had been involved in earlier designs, then his interest in silence might not be abstract. It might be professional survival, or Alistair might have misunderstood. The thought frustrated Fiona, but she forced herself to keep it. The dead, the missing, and the frightened deserved care, not blind faith. She had only fragments, ciphers, forged access, a missing report, a photograph, warnings from people under pressure. Enough to continue, not enough to conclude. Near 10, Fiona's phone vibrated again. This time the number was visible, unknown but local. Sheila shook her head. Fiona answered anyway, putting it on speaker without speaking. For a moment, there was only ambient noise, traffic perhaps, or wind against a microphone. Then the woman's voice came through. Mrs. Gallagher? Fiona sat upright. Moira? Yes, are you safe? The question was so direct that Fiona nearly gave an honest answer. For now. Good. Listen carefully. I'm only using this number once. Sheila pulled a notebook toward her. Moira continued. Alistair told me he'd involved a librarian. I told him that was reckless. He said librarians were the last people in the city who still understood custody of evidence. Fiona swallowed. Where is he? A pause. I don't know. Is he alive? Another pause, longer. He was 3 days ago. Fiona closed her eyes. Sheila stopped writing. Moira's voice roughened. He came to me after they threatened Morag. He wanted me to testify. I told him testimony wouldn't matter without the original materials. Not summaries, not scans. Original core samples with chain markings, batch identifiers, and the compression test discrepancies. That's when he said he had hidden the coordinates in the library system. The borrower's card, Fiona said. Yes, but you need the 1974 grid. The report is missing. I know, that's why I called. Fiona gripped the edge of the table. Do you have a copy? No, but the grid was reproduced in an insurance survey after the old freight depot fire in 1982. Different title. Same base map. It won't be in engineering. It'll be in municipal risk, fire loss, or commercial property claims. Fiona looked at Sheila. A copy. Not where it should be, but where bureaucracy had shed its skin. What exactly are we looking for? Fiona asked. Moira lowered her voice. A set of concrete cores taken before the final pour approvals. They were supposed to be destroyed after retesting because the results were labeled contaminated. That was false. They showed low cement content, chloride intrusion risk, and aggregate reaction potential. Enough to halt the pour, enough to delay the project by years. And someone buried them. Not buried, stored, then hidden in plain sight when the storage register was altered. Alistair believed they were moved into an unused maintenance void beneath the first underground level, near the old culvert alignment. Fiona pictured the glossy public map, the missing underground raft, the erased culverted watercourse beneath the development. Why didn't he go directly to the Safety Commission? He tried. The answer came quickly. Too quickly. What happened? He was told the complaint lacked standing without admissible evidence. Then Weatherby contacted him the next day. The name changed the temperature in the room. What did Weatherby say? I don't know all of it, but after that, Alistair stopped using email. He stopped sleeping at home, and he started leaving things in books. For a moment, only the rain against Sheila's windows filled the silence. Then Moira said, Mrs. Gallagher, I need to be clear. Alistair wasn't innocent in this, neither was I. Fiona did not speak. I signed an early compliance note I should have refused. He accepted design revisions he should have challenged harder. We both told ourselves there would be more tests, more checks, more chances for someone higher up to stop it. That is how these things happen. Not in one grand act of evil. In 100 small permissions given by tired people who want to keep their jobs. The confession landed quietly, without melodrama. Fiona felt its weight because it did not try to escape blame. Why help now? Sheila asked before Fiona could stop her. Moira gave a dry, humorless breath. Because buildings do not care how late remorse arrives. Fiona looked down at her notebook. The investigation had become personal, but not in the way she had expected. It was not simply Alistair, the brave whistleblower, against faceless corruption. It was messier than that. More human. A chain of compromises, fear, career pressure, and delayed conscience. That made it harder to trust anyone. It also made the danger more believable. Where do we meet you? Fiona asked. You don't, not yet. Find the 1982 insurance survey. Use the borrower's card against the grid. It should point to a void beneath the sea-level parking deck. If you find the coordinate, take it to someone outside Edinburgh. The Independent Structural Safety Commission? Yes, but not through their general office. Ask for Dr. Helen Armitage. She chaired the inquiry after the Inverness car park collapse. She won't dismiss physical evidence. Fiona wrote the name carefully. Moira's voice softened. And Mrs. Gallagher? Yes? If Daniel Price comes back with police, don't assume the officers know what they're being used for. People with money rarely need to corrupt a whole system. They only need to point honest procedure in the wrong direction. The call ended. Sheila sat back slowly. Well, that was encouraging. Fiona almost laughed, but the sound would not come. Instead, she looked again at the photograph of Weatherby on the laptop screen, standing in daylight beside a development that might already be failing underground. She thought of Alistair alive 3 days ago. She thought of the borrower's card lying on the archive work table, small enough to fit in a pocket, important enough to bring men to the door. At 11:30, Sheila made up the sofa with blankets and refused to discuss alternatives. Fiona lay down fully dressed, staring at the dark ceiling while the city muttered beyond the glass. Sleep did not arrive. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw holes punched through cream card, aligning not with a modern map, but with a buried grid from 1974. Just after 2 in the morning, her phone lit silently on the coffee table. A message had arrived from an unknown number. No words, only a photograph. Fiona opened it and the room seemed to tilt. It showed the archive work table at Morningside Public Library. The lamp was on, the conservation envelope was empty, and beside it, someone had placed Sheila's staff pass, neatly cut in half. By morning, the library had become 2 places at once. To the people waiting outside when the doors opened, it was still a public building with a warm foyer, a notice board full of community events, and a returns bin that smelled faintly of wet paper. It was where a retired man came to read the papers without heating his flat, where mothers brought toddlers to story hour, where students printed boarding passes and complained about the price of ink. The old stone facade stood under a washed grey sky, patient and respectable, as if nothing inside it could possibly matter beyond books, budgets, and overdue notices. To Fiona Gallagher, standing across the street beneath the bare branches of a plane tree, it looked like a crime scene no one had sealed. Sheila stood beside her, one hand closed around the 2 halves of her staff pass. The original pass was not in her pocket. It had been taken from her desk drawer, photographed on the archive work table, cut cleanly through the plastic, and left like a message. The fact that someone had placed it there after the building was closed meant at least one of 2 things. Either they still had access to the library, or they had never lost it. Neither possibility allowed Fiona to breathe properly. "You're sure you didn't leave it at the desk?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Sheila gave her a look sharpened by fatigue. I may be careless with paperback tape, but I know where I put my pass. Fiona nodded. The apology remained unspoken because there was no useful shape for it. They had not slept after the photograph arrived. Sheila had made coffee at 4, then tea at 5, then abandoned both on the kitchen counter. Fiona had enlarged the image on her phone until its pixels broke apart. The empty conservation envelope, the lamp, the cut pass, the corner of the work table, no hand visible, no reflection in the dark window, no identifying detail except the most intimate one. Someone had known exactly where the borrower's card had been. The card was gone. Alistair's coordinate system, the thread that might lead to the core samples, had been removed before Fiona understood how to use it. That was the first collapse. The second came when they entered the library through the staff door and found Daniel Price waiting in the foyer with 2 uniformed police officers. He was not at the archive door this time. He had chosen a public space where his presence could appear reasonable. He wore a navy overcoat, a pale tie, and the expression of a man inconvenienced by other people's instability. The officers beside him looked young, cold, and faintly embarrassed, as officers often did when assigned to something that carried paperwork rather than urgency. The library had not yet opened to the public, but Marcus was already behind the main desk, frozen with a bundle of returned DVDs in his hands. The cleaner stood near the lift, looking from Fiona to the officers and back again. "Mrs. Gallagher," Price said. "Good morning." Fiona did not answer immediately. She looked at the officers. "Is there a problem?" One of them, a woman with rain still beaded on her cap, stepped forward. "We're here following a report concerning unauthorized possession of commercial documents and possible misuse of council archive access. We'd like to ask a few questions." Fiona felt Sheila stiffen beside her. Price's expression remained sympathetic, almost sorrowful. "I did warn you that this could escalate," he said. The officer glanced at him, not sharply enough. Fiona saw then the elegance of Moira's warning. People with money rarely needed to corrupt a whole system. They only needed to point honest procedure in the wrong direction. The officers were not villains. They were standing in a library foyer because someone had given them a tidy complaint. Names, dates, perhaps even her staff initials on a false access record. A file had been arranged around her before she knew it existed. "I'll cooperate with any lawful request," Fiona said. "But I want the council legal department informed, and I want my union representative present for any formal interview." The female officer nodded. "That's your right." Price smiled slightly. "No one is trying to make this difficult." "Then stop speaking for the police," Sheila said. The foyer went quiet. Fiona wished briefly and intensely that Sheila had stayed home. Then she was grateful she had not. The male officer asked whether they could inspect the archive workroom. Fiona could not refuse without creating exactly the impression Price wanted. She led them upstairs, each step seeming louder than it should. The old building felt exposed around her. Doors she had unlocked for years now looked like failures. Corridors she trusted felt too long, too visible. In the workroom, the lamp was off. The conservation envelope still lay on the table. Empty. Sheila's pass was gone. Price noticed the envelope. "That appears to be one of the containers we discussed." Fiona turned to him. "You have not discussed containers with me." "With officers, Mrs. Gallagher." The female officer looked between them. "What was stored in it?" "A borrower's card from an archive item." "Where is it now?" Fiona looked at the empty envelope. "It was stolen during the night." Price gave a soft exhale, not quite a laugh. "That's convenient." Sheila stepped forward. "My staff pass was stolen too." "Do you have evidence of that?" the male officer asked. Sheila held up the 2 halves. "Someone sent us a photograph of it cut in half on this table." Fiona showed the image on her phone. The officers studied it. Price did not come close, but Fiona saw his eyes move once toward the work table, then to the window, then away. Recognition? Calculation? She could not tell. The female officer asked to record the image details. Fiona allowed it. She also requested that the after-hours access logs and camera footage be preserved immediately. The officer said she would note it. Noted. Fiona heard the fragility of that phrase. Price, meanwhile, produced a folder. He handed it to the officers, not Fiona. For context, this includes evidence that Mr. Alistair Kerr has a history of professional grievance relating to Northbank Quarter and former consultancy partners. We believe Mrs. Gallagher may have been misled into assisting him. Fiona watched the folder change hands, a history of professional grievance. The phrase had been prepared before it was needed. That frightened her more than Price's visit the night before. A threat could be improvised. A narrative took time. The female officer opened the folder. Fiona caught only glimpses, printed emails, excerpts from old disputes, a medical appointment letter perhaps, something highlighted in yellow. She could not read enough to judge what was real, what was selective, and what had been framed by omission. But she understood the effect. Alistair Kerr, once a careful retired architect, was being turned into an unstable source. And Fiona, by following his clues, was being turned into a gullible custodian who had mishandled public property. The apparent explanation had arrived with official witnesses. No conspiracy, no structural danger, only a troubled man distributing stolen documents, aided by a librarian who had stepped beyond her role. For one long moment, the explanation almost worked. Not because Fiona trusted Price, she did not, but because the alternative was enormous. To believe Alistair meant believing that a major city development might contain fatal structural flaws, that documents had been altered, that a company connected to public regeneration had sent men into a library, that the normal channels might be too compromised, too slow, or too easily misdirected to stop what was coming. Her mind resisted the scale of it. The human mind preferred small scandals. They fit into rooms, they could be filed. But buildings, Moira had said, did not care how late remorse arrived. Fiona looked at the empty envelope again. If Alistair were merely troubled, why steal the card? If the codes meant nothing, why enter the archive after hours? If the documents were only proprietary, why hide behind police procedure rather than produce a structural rebuttal? The official story explained Alistair's fear. It did not explain theirs. That was the turning point. It did not feel heroic. It felt cold, a quiet internal break, like ice giving way beneath snow. Fiona understood then that her original belief had been too small. She had thought she was deciphering what Alistair knew. In truth, she was deciphering what others needed erased. The officers asked her to surrender any related materials for review. Fiona could feel Price listening. She made herself look uncertain. It was not difficult. I placed several items aside for condition assessment, she said. There are notes, but I'll need to check which are relevant. Price's gaze sharpened. The female officer said, "Please gather what you have." "I will, properly." Fiona turned toward the shelves, buying seconds, only seconds, but sometimes seconds were enough for a mind trained in catalogues. The vellum overlay and her copied notes were not on the work table. They were hidden inside an archival tube labelled with an 1884 street plan. The police could lawfully request materials. Price could pressure them. But if she surrendered the only remaining evidence without independent duplication, the investigation would be over before it reached anyone capable of understanding it. She retrieved instead the open engineering volume, the empty envelope, and a printed copy of the false guest access record bearing her initials. She also gave them Daniel Price's business card from the previous night. Price did not like that. It showed only briefly in the tightening near his jaw, but Fiona saw it. "This card was pushed through the archive door after closing," she said to the officers. "Before the after-hours intrusion." Price's voice remained pleasant. "I left my card because Mrs. Gallagher refused a reasonable conversation." "After you identified Miss Lennox by name," Fiona said. The female officer looked up. "Who is Miss Lennox?" No one answered at first. Price recovered quickly. A former testing employee associated with Mr. Kerr's allegations, also a person of interest in the mishandling of proprietary materials. There it was again. A net wide enough to catch everyone before anyone spoke. Fiona said nothing more. She had learned something useful. Price did not want Moira named in front of the police without his framing attached. The officers left with the items Fiona had surrendered, promising follow-up. Price walked behind them, then paused at the workroom door. "You're putting yourself in a very exposed position," he said quietly. Fiona looked at him. "So are your buildings." For the first time, all politeness drained from his face. Only for a second. Then he smiled and left. By noon, the library had opened and become ordinary by force. Patrons moved through the aisles unaware that men in dark coats had stood among the reference shelves, that evidence had vanished from a locked workroom, that the head librarian had just lied by omission to police officers because the truth had no safe route yet. Fiona worked at her desk with the discipline of someone performing normality under observation. She answered emails, approved a staff rota, spoke to a volunteer about damaged pamphlet boxes. Every few minutes, she felt the pull of the hidden archival tube in Stack Room 2, as if it had weight across the building. At 1 o'clock, she went down alone. The fluorescent lights flickered awake over the lower stacks. She moved directly to the shelf, pulled the 1884 street plan tube, and carried it to the inspection table. Her fingers were cold inside the gloves. She opened the tube. The reproduction map slid out first, then the vellum overlay, then her handwritten notes. Still there, she exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. But relief lasted only until she unrolled the map fully. A sheet of paper had been inserted inside the tube with the other materials. Not by Fiona. It was a photocopy of an old newspaper clipping, folded once. The headline was small, from a local business page years earlier. Engineer dies after fall at redevelopment site. Below it was a photograph of a man Fiona did not know. Someone had circled the caption in red ink. The name was Ewan Weatherby. Fiona stared at it, feeling the investigation tilt again beneath her. Graham Weatherby had a son, and his son had died at Northbank Quarter before the project was ever announced to the public. By late afternoon, the name Ewan Weatherby had begun to move through Fiona Gallagher's mind like a loose stone in machinery. It caught on everything. Every document she opened, every conversation she replayed, every explanation Daniel Price had offered with that polished, careful voice. A troubled retired architect, a former testing officer with allegations, a librarian misled into mishandling archive material. Those pieces had been arranged for her, almost gently, like furniture in a room meant to look familiar. But Ewan Weatherby did not fit inside that room. The newspaper clipping lay beneath the conservation lamp, its old print softened by photocopy grain. The article was brief, the kind of local business report written when tragedy must be acknowledged without inconveniencing the powerful. A young engineer had died following a fall at a redevelopment site near the former rail yards. The incident had occurred during early enabling works, before Northbank Quarter had a public brand, before glossy images of rooftop gardens and open plazas appeared on buses across the city. The wording was careful. A workplace accident, emergency services attended, no wider risk to the public, investigation ongoing. Fiona had read enough public reports to know how much could disappear between those phrases. Ewan Weatherby had been 29. The article described him as a promising structural engineer and the son of Graham Weatherby, then a respected technical director. It mentioned condolences from the contractor and cooperation with workplace safety authorities. It did not say why Ewan had been on site after hours. It did not say where he had fallen from. It did not say whether he had been alone. Most importantly, it did not say why someone had hidden this clipping inside the same tube as Alistair's remaining evidence. Fiona sat back, the old wooden chair creaking beneath her. The library above her carried on. Footsteps crossed the ceiling. Somewhere a child objected loudly to leaving. The lift doors opened and closed with their tired metallic shudder. Each sound reached the lower stacks, softened by stone and distance, as if the building were trying to protect her from its own life. It was no longer enough. For the first time since the vellum appeared, Fiona understood that the investigation was not merely damaging her quiet life. It was replacing it. There had been boundaries before, work and home, archive and street, public duty and private caution. She had believed in those boundaries with almost religious devotion. Now the mystery had crossed all of them. It had followed her to a bus stop, entered Sheila's flat through a photograph, brought police into the library, and placed a dead young man's name in her hands. She could stop. The thought came not as cowardice, but as practicality. She could call the council legal team, surrender every remaining item, document her concerns, and step back. She could say she had done her duty. She could let institutions absorb the matter at their own pace. If those institutions failed, it would not be because Fiona Gallagher had failed. She was a librarian, not an investigator, not an engineer, not a prosecutor, not the conscience of a city. But the moment she formed the argument, she saw the underground car park in Alistair's photograph. The cracked pillar, the unfinished concrete, the red mark on C7. She saw the empty borrower's card envelope. She saw Daniel Price's face when she said, "So are your buildings." Fear wanted her to confuse limits with innocence. She could not. At 4:30, Sheila came down to stack room 2 without knocking. She had a printout in one hand and the expression of someone who had found something she wished had remained hidden. "You need to see this," she said. Fiona took the page. It was a cached copy of a workplace safety tribunal note, difficult to read because much of the formatting had broken. The case had never gone to a full public hearing. Settlement reached. Terms confidential. The parties included a subcontractor, an insurance representative, and the family of Ewan Weatherby. Near the bottom, in a surviving paragraph, was a phrase that made Fiona's throat tighten. Disputed access to lower-level temporary works area. "Sheila," Fiona said quietly, "where did you find this?" "An archived legal bulletin, not indexed properly. The link is dead from the main site, but the text is still cached in some dreadful old database Marcus uses when he's avoiding real work." Fiona read the phrase again, lower-level temporary works area. That could mean anything. It could mean a scaffold, an access platform, a service void. It could mean the underground levels near the old culvert alignment. It could mean the place where Moira believed the core samples were hidden. It could also mean nothing. The danger now was not lack of information, but too much suggestive information, each piece leaning toward the next, none yet strong enough to bear full weight. Fiona could feel the temptation of narrative. A dead son, a guilty father, a covered-up construction floor. It was the shape a human mind wanted because it made grief explain corruption. But real scandals did not always arrange themselves so cleanly. She placed the tribunal note beside the clipping. "We do not know what happened to him," she said. "No," Sheila replied, "but someone wanted us to ask." That was true. And that someone could be Alistair, or Moira, or someone else inside the building, or someone trying to lead Fiona away from the missing core samples. A clue could be a lantern or a lure. The difference often became clear only after it was too late. At 5, Marcus appeared in the doorway, pale and unusually silent. "Fiona," he said, "there's a problem upstairs." Sheila sighed. "If it's the copier again, I'm defecting to another library." "It's not the copier." Fiona followed him to the staff office, where 3 employees stood around the shared computer with the anxious stillness of people trying not to look responsible. On the screen was an email from the council's Library Services Directorate. Subject: immediate administrative leave, pending review. Fiona read it once without understanding, then again. The message was formal, polite, and devastating, due to concerns raised regarding archive access irregularities, potential mishandling of restricted materials, and unauthorized communication with external parties connected to an active commercial dispute. Fiona Gallagher was to step back from operational duties with immediate effect pending internal review. She was to surrender keys, staff access credentials, and any council-owned devices before leaving the premises. Her staff watched her read it. No one spoke. The library seemed to fall away around her. Fiona had always known her position was modest in the larger machinery of the city. She was not a politician, not a developer, not a person quoted in business pages. But within these walls, she had been trusted. The keys in her pocket meant something. The archive door opened because she opened it. The fragile collections remained safe because people believed she would keep them safe. Now an email had reduced that trust to a pending review. Sheila's voice came from behind her, low and furious. "They can't do this without speaking to you." "They can," Marcus said weakly. "It says pending review." Fiona looked at the staff around her. Marcus would not meet her eyes. The cleaner had retreated into the corridor. A junior assistant named Leanne was crying quietly, perhaps from fear, perhaps from embarrassment at witnessing someone's professional life being dismantled in real time. Fiona felt oddly calm, not because the blow did not hurt. It did. It struck some private, unarmored place in her. For decades she had been careful. Careful with rules, careful with speech, Careful with other people's property, careful with her own modest ambitions. She had believed carefulness offered protection. Now carefulness was being used against her, converted into hesitation. Hesitation into suspicion, suspicion into procedure. Daniel Price had not needed to threaten her career in the archive corridor. He had only needed to know where to press. The email instructed her to leave by 6. Fiona turned to Marcus. "Please print that." He did. She read the printed copy, folded it once and placed it in her bag. Then she took the library keys from her belt ring. The metal felt heavier than it should have. Sheila shook her head. "Fiona, don't just hand them over. If I refuse, they will say refusal proves the concern. They'll say whatever suits them." "Yes," Fiona said, "so I'll give them fewer useful sentences." She signed the temporary handover form. Her signature looked strange to her, as if written by someone imitating her hand. A thought crossed her mind then, quick and bitter. Perhaps that was how Sheila's forged initials had looked to someone who did not care enough to notice. Before leaving, Fiona requested permission to collect personal items from her office. The acting duty manager, who had been sent from another branch and looked deeply unhappy about his role, agreed but insisted Marcus accompany her. Her office was small, too warm and lined with files. A mug from a conference in York sat beside a stack of acquisition forms. On the wall hung a framed photograph of the library taken in 1912. Its stone facade cleaner then, its entrance crowded with men in hats and women in long coats. Fiona had always liked the photograph because everyone in it seemed unaware they were becoming history. Marcus stood by the door, miserable. "I'm sorry," he said. "You haven't done anything." "I told them you were careful." Fiona looked at him. "Who?" "The directorate. Someone called from central office before the email. Asked whether you'd been under stress. Whether Mr. Kerr came in often. Whether you'd been keeping unusual hours." Fiona slowly closed the drawer she had opened. "What did you say?" "I said you always keep unusual hours. It's archives." His voice trembled. "I didn't know they'd use it like that." Fiona felt a brief, sharp pity for him. He was young enough to believe facts remained themselves after leaving his mouth. "It's all right," she said. "It's not." "No, but it is not your fault." She placed 2 personal notebooks, her reading glasses, and her father's old fountain pen into her bag. She did not take any archive material. She did not take the vellum. She did not take the hidden notes. They remained in Stack Room 2, beyond her reach now, unless Sheila or someone else could retrieve them later. That fact cut deeper than the suspension. At the staff exit, Sheila waited with her coat on. "I'm coming with you," she said. "No, you're staying." Sheila opened her mouth. Fiona stopped her gently. "You still have access." The meaning passed between them. Sheila's eyes narrowed. "That is a terrible idea." "Yes. You're asking me to risk my job." "I know." For several seconds, the 2 women stood in the narrow corridor among notice boards, fire instructions, and a faded poster about staff well-being. Then Sheila gave a small, grim nod. "Go home. Don't answer the door. Don't answer unknown numbers." Fiona almost smiled. "You know I will." "That's what worries me." Outside, evening had settled early. Edinburgh glistened under rain and sodium light. Fiona walked alone this time, though every instinct told her she was not unwatched. She did not take the bus. She moved through side streets, past basement flats with curtains drawn, past restaurants fogged with warmth, past a churchyard where wet leaves clung to the old stones. Her phone buzzed twice, but she did not look until she reached her building. The first message was from her sister in Stirling, asking if everything was all right, because Fiona had sounded strange the previous week. The second was from an unknown number. It contained no photograph, only text. "Administrative leave is kinder than prison." There was no signature. Fiona stood in the stairwell of her own building, the smell of damp coats and old paint around her, and understood that the investigation had crossed another line. It was no longer about whether she could keep her position, her routine, her reputation. Those things were already being taken, piece by piece, with forms and whispers and messages designed to sound inevitable. She climbed to her flat and locked the door behind her. For a moment, she leaned against it in the dark hallway and allowed herself one silent, shaking breath. Then she switched on the light. The sitting room had been searched, not ransacked, not crudely disturbed. searched by someone disciplined enough to leave most things almost where they had been. A drawer sat 2 centimeters open. A stack of letters had been squared too neatly. Her father's framed photograph had been turned slightly toward the wall. On the small table by the window, where she normally kept nothing but a reading lamp and a bowl of keys, lay a single object. A punched cream borrower's card, the stolen card, returned. And across it, written in red ink, were 4 words that made the room feel suddenly airless: choose silence or Moira dies. The first thing Fiona Gallagher did was not call the police. Later, she would remember that detail with a mixture of shame and clarity. There had been a time, not long before, when a threat written in red ink on a stolen library card would have sent her directly to the nearest station, or at least to the non-emergency line, where she would have waited through the recorded messages and explained herself carefully to someone trained to sort urgency from distress. But that version of Fiona belonged to the life before Daniel Price had stood in her archive with 2 officers beside him, before an official email had stripped her of her keys, before her own staff initials had been forged into a system she was now accused of mishandling, before the quiet machinery of procedure had been turned, smoothly and politely, against her. She stood in her sitting room, coat still wet from the rain, staring at the borrower's card on the table. Choose silence or Moira dies. The handwriting was not Alistair's, too blunt, too broad. The red ink had bled slightly into the cream paper, feathering at the edges of each letter. The holes punched through the card remained visible beneath the threat. 3 vertical columns, irregular but deliberate, like a private constellation waiting for the correct sky. Someone had searched her flat. Someone had taken the card from the archive. Someone had returned it, not because they wanted her to have it, but because they wanted her to understand that nothing she touched was beyond them. Fiona did not move for a full minute. The flat around her seemed both familiar and untrustworthy. The narrow hallway, the bookcase with its carefully ordered volumes on conservation, Scottish municipal history, and a few crime novels Sheila had insisted she borrow. The grey sofa, the reading lamp, the framed photograph of her father taken years before illness softened his eyes. Everything remained almost itself. That was the cruelty of a careful search. It left the victim to supply the violence from imagination. She put on gloves, not cotton archive gloves this time, but the thin nitrile pair she kept beneath the sink for cleaning silverfish traps from old boxes. Her hands shook as she pulled them on. The sound of the material snapping at her wrists seemed indecently loud. She photographed the card from 4 angles. Then she photographed the room, the half-open drawer, the letters squared too neatly, the turned photograph, the mark on the windowsill where damp grit had been pressed into a line by a shoe or knee. She did not know whether any of it would matter. She only knew that evidence vanished fastest when frightened people assumed someone else would know what to preserve. After that, she sat on the edge of the sofa and let herself think. Moira. The threat said Moira would die if Fiona continued. It might be true. It might be a bluff. It might mean they did not know where Moira was and hoped Fiona would lead them to her. It might mean Moira was already in their reach and Fiona's choices no longer mattered. Every possibility was unbearable because none could be tested safely. Fiona picked up her phone, then put it down. If she called Moira, the number might be monitored. If she called Sheila, she might endanger her further. If she called the police, the report could travel through exactly the same channels Daniel Price had already learned to use. If she did nothing, silence itself became cooperation. Her father used to say a bad measurement was worse than no measurement because it made a person confident in the wrong direction. Fiona had not thought of that phrase in years. Now it returned with painful precision. She had too many measurements, but none yet anchored to proof. She placed the borrower's card inside a clean freezer bag and sealed it. Then she cleared the small table and took out the materials she still had in her personal notebooks. The drawn copy of the crack pattern on pillar C7, the phrases from load transfer, the date from Alistair's photograph, Moira's explanation of the core samples, the name to Helen Armitage, and the photocopied clipping of Ewan Weatherby that she had copied by hand before surrendering nothing official. No original vellum, no 1974 report, no 1982 insurance survey, no core samples. The most important proof was still missing. But for the first time, the outline of the hidden truth had begun to show. Not as a conspiracy in the dramatic sense. There were no secret rooms full of masked men, no grand ideology, no villainous monologue. It appeared instead as something more ordinary and therefore more frightening. A development moving too quickly, certification pressure, compromised tests, revised maps, temporary works, a fatal accident softened into paperwork, a retired architect unable to live with what he had signed, a materials officer carrying delayed guilt, a former partner now embedded in the assurance process, and a property firm willing to protect an opening date as if it were a living thing. Fiona drew a line down the center of a notebook page. On one side she wrote, "What they want hidden." On the other, "Who knows?" Under the first heading, she listed the concrete cause, the old culvert alignment, the underground raft removed from public maps, pillar codes C7, N4, K13, the missing subsurface report, the 1982 insurance survey, and Ewan Weatherby's death. Under the second, she wrote Alistair Kerr, Moira Lennox, Graham Weatherby, Daniel Price, perhaps Canwell, perhaps council contacts, perhaps someone inside the library. Then she stopped. Someone inside the library. The thought had been waiting at the edge of her mind, but she had refused to give it form. The card had been stolen from the archive work table after hours. Sheila's pass had been taken and cut. The hidden tube had been opened by someone who knew where to place the Ewan clipping. Price had arrived with police by morning. Her suspension had followed with remarkable speed. Access explained part of it. Knowledge explained more. Fiona did not want to suspect her own staff. She had built her life around trust in small teams and shared keys. But archives did not respond to sentiment. Someone had known the rhythms of the building well enough to enter, search, plant, remove, and vanish. Or someone had been given that knowledge. She opened her laptop and signed into her personal email. Her council account was already disabled. The error message appeared with bureaucratic swiftness. She stared at it longer than necessary, feeling the small humiliation of being locked out of her own professional identity. Then she searched public catalogues. Moira had said the 1974 grid was reproduced in an insurance survey after the old freight depot fire in 1982. Different title, same base map, not engineering. Municipal risk, fire loss, commercial property claims. Fiona searched the National Library catalogue first. Too broad. Too many insurance records not publicly indexed. Then the Edinburgh City Archives public index, which she could still access without staff credentials. Fire reports, property claims, industrial losses, freight depot, North Leith, rail yards, 1982. Results appeared slowly. Most were irrelevant. A warehouse roof collapse in Slateford, a flood claim in Granton, a fire brigade annual report, a compensation dispute over damaged goods at a bonded store. Then one title caught her eye. Commercial fire loss assessment, former North Leith freight depot and adjacent service yards, 1982. The record description was brief. Location survey attached, insurance underwriter's map, restricted handling due to fragile foldouts, repository, Central Municipal Risk Archive. Fiona read the line twice. The Central Municipal Risk Archive was not part of the public library system. It sat in a council storage facility near Sighthill, a place of grey cladding and coded doors where paper went when departments no longer wanted it but were not yet allowed to destroy it. Fiona had visited twice in her career. It was not welcoming. It was not designed for researchers. Access required authorization, appointment, and patience. She had none of those, but she knew someone who might. Not Sheila. Not now. Sheila was too close, too watched, too exposed through the cut staff pass. Marcus might have technical access, but involving him would be unfair and perhaps useless. The acting duty manager would never risk it. Fiona scrolled down the catalogue record until she found the accession note. Transferred from Municipal Insurance Office, 1996. Processed by temporary archivist R. Anstruther. She almost missed the name, then memory opened. Rory Anstruther. He had been a temporary archivist in the 1990s, then a records consultant, then a quiet, difficult man who wrote angry letters to journals about digitization errors and the destruction of local government paper trails. Fiona had met him at a preservation conference in Dundee 12 years earlier. He had cornered her beside a tea urn and spoken for 15 minutes about the moral importance of original fold-out maps. At the time, she had found him exhausting. Now he seemed like Providence. She searched his name, no current employer, occasional lectures, a postal address in Portobello listed on a recent Heritage Society newsletter, no phone number. It was nearly 9 o'clock. Fiona looked at the borrower's card in the freezer bag, then at the threat. Choose silence or Moira dies. The obvious interpretation was that she should stop. But threats like maps could be read more than one way. Whoever wrote it had returned the coordinate key because they believed fear would neutralize its usefulness. They had not understood librarians, or perhaps they had understood only the public version of them. Helpful women behind desks, guardians of quiet, people who asked for ID cards and lowered voices. They had not understood what it meant to spend 30 years learning how fragile truth was once separated from its source. Fiona took a small overnight bag from the cupboard. Into it, she placed the borrower's card, her notebook, a torch, a portable phone charger, a packet of oatcakes, her father's fountain pen, and the Old City AZ she still kept because batteries died and maps on paper did not report your location. She left the flat through the back stair, not the front. The rain had stopped, but the pavements shone. Edinburgh at night held its beauty like a withheld answer. The curve of wet stone, the black ribs of bare trees, the distant rise of the old volcanic hill against cloud. Fiona walked without hurrying. Running made people memorable. Fear made people careless. She moved through side streets until she reached a taxi rank near a hotel. Then took a cab to Portobello, but asked to be dropped 2 streets short of the address. The driver made no conversation. Rory Anstruther lived in a ground-floor flat near the sea, in a terrace where the windows faced the damp darkness beyond the promenade. The wind smelled of salt and old rain. Fiona stood outside for a full minute, listening. Somewhere a dog barked. A television murmured behind a wall. The curtains in Rory's front room were drawn, but light showed at the edges. She knocked, no answer. She knocked again, softer. A voice from inside said, "If you're selling insulation, I'm already disappointed in you." "Mr. Anstruther, my name is Fiona Gallagher. We met at the Dundee Preservation Conference. You told me digitization was a funeral with a search bar." Silence. Then the lock turned. Rory Anstruther was thinner than she remembered, his white hair standing in uneven tufts, his cardigan buttoned incorrectly over a shirt that had seen better ironing. He looked at her through the chain gap with bright, suspicious eyes. "I remember the line, he said. "Not you. That is fair. What do you want at this hour?" "I need to find an insurance survey from 1982. Northleith Freight Depot fire. It may contain a location grid reproduced from a 1974 subsurface report." His suspicion sharpened into interest. Why? Fiona could have lied. She did not. Because someone is trying very hard to stop it being read. Rory looked past her toward the street. Then he closed the door. For a moment, Fiona thought he had refused her. The chain slid free. He opened the door wider. Inside, the flat smelled of old paper, tobacco and sea damp. Boxes lined the hallway, each labeled in ink. Rory led her to a sitting room where archive catalogues, handwritten indexes and newspapers occupied most available surfaces. It was disorderly, but not chaotic. Fiona recognized the distinction immediately. Rory listened without interrupting as she explained only what was necessary. The missing report, the old grid, the borrower's card, the need to locate a maintenance void beneath the development. She did not mention Moira's threat at first. Then, because a mission had become its own danger, she did. Rory's face changed very little. When she finished, he stood and went to a cabinet beneath the window. From it, he removed a ring binder, then another, then a folded photocopy sleeved in plastic. "You don't need Sighthill," he said. Fiona stared at him. He placed the sleeve on the table. "I processed the municipal insurance transfer in 1996. The fold-out maps were mold damaged. I made reference copies before the originals were sealed. No one wanted them then. No one ever wants the maps until money starts lying." Fiona stepped closer. The photocopy showed the former rail yards, service roads, drainage channels, old retaining walls, and beneath them a grid printed in small black letters and numbers. CNK. A faint line marked the culverted watercourse running through the site. Her breath caught. Rory handed her a ruler. "Show me the card." Fiona removed the freezer bag, opened it carefully, and slid the punched card onto the plastic sleeve. At first, the holes did not align. Rory adjusted the scale using the old margin ticks. He turned the card 90 degrees. Fiona saw it then. The holes were not meant to sit over streets or pillars. They matched the survey grid intersections beneath the old freight depot. 3 holes formed a path: C7, N4, K13. But a fourth, smaller hole, one Fiona had dismissed as damage, sat beyond the main pattern near the old culvert line. Rory leaned closer. "That's not a pillar coordinate. What is it?" He traced the old map with the ruler, following the culvert alignment beneath what was now Northbank Quarter's underground parking structure. "It's an access point," he said, or it was. "Maintenance hatch for drainage inspection, pre-redevelopment." Fiona looked at where the fourth hole fell. Rory checked the modern overlay from a city planning website, adjusting the scale by eye with the confidence of a man who had spent his life distrustful of software. The point lay beneath the first underground level of the new district, behind what the public plans labelled as service storage, near the sea-level parking deck, near the temporary works area where Ewan Weatherby had died, near the place Moira said the core samples had been hidden. For the first time, the pieces did not merely suggest a shape, they connected. Fiona felt no triumph, only a deepening dread. "Can you copy this?" she asked. Rory looked offended. "I can do better than copy it." He went to an old flatbed scanner on a side table, the kind Fiona would have expected to find in a museum or a court evidence room. While it warmed with a low mechanical hum, Fiona's phone vibrated. She looked at the screen. A message from Sheila, only 6 words. "They are evacuating the library now." The message from Sheila appeared without explanation, which made it worse. "They are evacuating the library now." Fiona Gallagher stood in Rory and Struthers' paper-crowded sitting room, with the old survey grid spread beneath a plastic sleeve, the punched borrower's card aligned over it like a key finally turned in a lock. For a moment, her mind refused to move. The library was closed to her now. Officially, she had no authority there, no keys, no staff access, no right to interfere in whatever reason had emptied the building. Yet every part of her body reacted as though a fire had reached her own home. Rory looked up from the scanner. "Bad news?" Fiona handed him the phone. He read the message, then glanced toward the old map. "Could be routine." "It isn't." "No," he said quietly. "Probably not." The scanner lamp moved slowly beneath the glass, washing the 1982 insurance survey in a pale strip of light. It seemed indecently calm. Fiona watched it pass over the old culvert line, the grid coordinates, the forgotten maintenance access point. The machine recorded what people had tried to erase. Not an accusation, not a conclusion, but a relationship between places. A map could not testify to motive, but it could prove that a hidden point existed where official drawings showed nothing worth noticing. Her phone vibrated again. A second message from Sheila. Fire alarm. No smoke. Men from central office here. Price with them. Fiona felt the words enter her like cold water. Daniel Price had returned to the library, and this time he had come during an evacuation. The fake emergency was almost elegant. Clear the public out. Scatter staff. Create confusion. Bring in central office representatives who could claim administrative authority. Enter the archive under the pretext of protecting materials. Remove whatever remained before Fiona, Sheila, or anyone else could object. The vellum overlay was still there. Her handwritten notes were still there. Possibly the only remaining original cipher documents were inside Stack Room 2, hidden in the archival tube Fiona could no longer lawfully retrieve. Rory removed the copied survey from the scanner and placed it into a folder. "Go," he said. Fiona looked at him. "I'll send the scan to 3 places," he continued. "One to you, one to myself, one to a retired solicitor who owes me a favor and still believes paper has a soul. That may put you at risk." At my age, risk is mostly repetition. He held out the folder. "Take the reference copy. If you lose it, I'll deny giving it to you and then produce another one at an inconvenient moment." Fiona might have laughed if fear had left room for it. She slid the copied survey, the borrower's card and her notebook into the overnight bag. Rory handed her an old waterproof document pouch as though equipping someone for a journey across a river. At the door, he stopped her. "Mrs. Gallagher." "Yes?" "You understand what you have now, don't you? A possible location. More than that. You have proof that the hidden coordinate system predates the development maps. If someone claims this is fantasy, ask why a retired architect hid a modern warning inside an obsolete insurance grid no one was supposed to remember." Fiona nodded. "And if you find those core samples," Rory said, "do not bring them back to the library." The advice hurt because it was correct. She stepped out into the damp night and walked quickly toward the main road. Portobello's streets were mostly quiet, windows glowing behind curtains, the sea invisible but present in the salt wind. She called no taxi from outside Rory's flat. Instead, she walked 3 blocks, crossed twice, and flagged one near a takeaway where 2 delivery riders smoked beneath an awning. "Morningside Public Library," she said, then changed her mind before the driver pulled away. "No, 2 streets behind it, near the service lane." The driver shrugged and started the meter. Edinburgh passed in fragments: dark shop fronts, wet traffic lights, stone terraces, the brief flare of late buses, a couple arguing under an umbrella, a fox slipping beneath a parked van. Fiona sat in the back with the document pouch pressed against her ribs. She thought of Alistair alive 3 days ago, perhaps moving from safe place to unsafe place with the same terrible knowledge in his head. She thought of Moira hidden somewhere, or not hidden enough. She thought of Graham Weatherby and the dead son, whose name had been placed before her like a wound someone wanted opened. When the taxi stopped, she paid in cash and approached the library on foot. The first thing she saw was the blue pulse of emergency lights reflected in the rain-dark pavement. A fire engine stood near the front entrance. Its crew looked unhurried, which confirmed more than reassured her. Staff clustered beneath the awning of the building opposite, wrapped in coats, speaking in low bursts. Sheila was among them, face pale, scanning the street until she saw Fiona. Her expression changed from relief to fury in less than a second. "You absolute idiot!" Sheila hissed when Fiona reached her. "Is everyone out?" "Yes, there's no fire. Alarm triggered in the basement zone. Fire crew checked the public areas. Then central office arrived with Price and said they needed to secure the archive because of your ongoing review." "Who let them in?" "The acting manager. He looked like he wanted to crawl under the returns desk and become carpet." Fiona looked toward the library entrance. Daniel Price stood just inside the lit foyer, speaking to a woman in a council coat and a fire officer. Beyond them, the main staircase led upward toward the archive wing. If Price was still in the foyer, his men might already be upstairs. "The tube?" Fiona asked. Sheila understood at once. "Still in stack room 2 as far as I know, but they asked for access to all restricted storage." "Can you get me in?" Sheila stared at her. "You're suspended." "Yes." "There are firefighters, council officers, possibly police, and men who have already broken into your flat." "Yes." "And your plan is to sneak back into the archive?" Fiona looked at the old building. The carved owls above the entrance were lit from below, their worn faces made severe by rain and flashing blue light. "They're not here to secure the archive. They're here to empty it." Sheila said nothing for a moment. Then she reached into her coat and produced her replacement staff pass. "I never gave them my spare lanyard," she said, "because I am petty and vindictive." "Those are fine archival qualities." "Don't make me laugh. I'm furious with you." Sheila led Fiona away from the gathered staff, around the side of the building, toward the old delivery lane. The staff entrance was visible from the front, but the basement service door was not. It had once been used for coal deliveries and later for conservation equipment. Officially, it was alarmed and accessible only from inside. Unofficially, like many Victorian buildings improved by committees over a century, it possessed habits no modern security plan had fully understood. Sheila unlocked a narrow external grille with a key from her personal ring. Fiona looked at her. "You kept that?" "It opens the meter cupboard, and, apparently, the end of civilization." They slipped inside. The corridor beyond smelled of damp stone and old dust. Emergency lights cast the walls in a greenish pallor. Somewhere above them, an alarm pulsed in steady, muffled intervals. Not deafening down here, but present enough to unsettle thought. Fiona knew this lower route from building maintenance plans and childhood tours given to overexcited school groups. A passage leading past boiler access, old storage bays, and the sealed coal chute corridor beneath the archive wing. They moved quickly, not speaking unless necessary. At the first stairwell, Sheila stopped. "I'll go up through staff offices. If anyone asks, I'm fetching medication from my locker. You take the lower passage to stack room 2. That door may be locked." Sheila handed her a key. "Then don't lose that." Fiona closed her hand around it. "Thank you. Don't. If I get sacked, I'm haunting you." Sheila went up. Fiona continued alone. The passage narrowed as it approached the older foundations. The air changed again, cooler and mineral-heavy, with a faint smell of soot that had survived generations of paint. Pipes crossed overhead. Her torch beam caught flaking labels, brick arches, a rusted sign reading coal store, and the dark mouth of a blocked chute beyond an iron railing. The library above was being searched by men who believed the important rooms were the ones with locks, catalogues, and staff procedures. Fiona moved beneath them, through the building's forgotten body. At the end of the passage, a service stair rose to a door behind stack room 2. She had used it only twice before, both during flood inspections. The key turned with a reluctant scrape. She eased the door open. The stack room was dark except for red emergency lamps and the pale spill of light from the corridor beyond. Voices came from upstairs, men's voices, one she recognized immediately. Daniel Price. "Check the map tubes," he was saying. She had time to hide copies. Fiona froze. Another voice replied, "Which section?" "All local planning, North Leith, railway, foundations, anything pre-digital." They knew enough. Not everything, but enough. Fiona moved between shelves by memory, keeping low, the overnight bag tight against her side. The old metal stacks created lanes of shadow. Her breath sounded too loud. The alarm beat above and through the walls like a mechanical heart. She reached the shelf containing the 1884 street plan tube. It was gone. For a moment she could not process the empty space. Then she saw it on a trolley near the far aisle among a dozen other map tubes and flat boxes pulled from storage. A man in a dark jacket stood beside it, reading labels under a torch. His back was turned. Fiona's hand tightened around the key Sheila had given her. She could leave. She had Rory's copy of the survey and the borrower's card. She had enough to locate the access point. Perhaps the vellum no longer mattered, but the vellum was the original thread from Alistair. It connected his warning to the books to the pillars to Northbank Quarter. Without it, Price could call everything else interpretation. A troubled man, a gullible librarian, a copied map from a retired archivist's flat. Originals mattered. She waited until the man turned toward a voice in the corridor. Then she moved. 3 steps. 4. Her shoulder brushed a hanging tag. It swung gently. She reached the trolley, found the tube, and slid off the cap. The reproduction map was inside. So were her notes. The vellum was not. Her stomach dropped. Then she saw a corner of translucent material protruding from beneath a flat archival box on the lower shelf of the trolley. The man had removed it and set it aside, perhaps not yet understanding what it was. Fiona bent slowly. A beam of light struck the floor beside her. "Who's there?" the man said. Fiona grabbed the vellum and ran. Fiona did not run like someone in a film. She ran like a 50-year-old librarian, carrying fragile evidence through a darkened storage room, while an alarm pulsed through the walls and a man behind her shouted for others to stop her. Her breath came unevenly. Her shoes slipped once on the polished concrete floor. The vellum, folded loosely in one gloved hand, felt impossibly delicate, as if the entire weight of the investigation had been placed inside something thinner than skin. Behind her, the man's torch beam broke across the shelves. "Stop," he called. "Stop there." Fiona did not stop. She knew stack room 2 better than anyone in the building. She knew the narrow gap behind the oversized map cabinets, the awkward turn beside the bound newspapers, the low pipe near the old ventilation shaft that taller people always struck with their shoulders. Knowledge, for once, became speed. She ducked through a gap between shelving ranges just as another man entered from the main corridor. Where did she go? Back aisle. Daniel Price's voice cut through the alarm from somewhere beyond them, calm but sharpened. "Do not let her leave with anything." The words pushed Fiona harder than fear did. She reached the rear service door and pulled it open. The lower stairwell waited beyond, lit only by the weak green emergency lamp. She descended too fast, one hand sliding along the damp rail, the overnight bag thudding against her hip. Halfway down, she heard footsteps above her, heavy, faster than hers. At the bottom, she turned into the old coal passage. The air there was colder, grittier, touched by a soot smell that seemed to rise from the 19th century itself. Her torch shook in her hand, throwing light across brick arches and rusted metal brackets. The passage had once carried fuel into the belly of the library. Now it carried a suspended librarian, a copied survey grid, a stolen borrower's card, and Alistair Kerr's vellum warning toward a way out no one had used for decades. Or so she hoped. The main service exit lay behind her, too exposed. Sheila might still be upstairs, inventing reasons to be where she should not be. The front was full of fire crew and council officers. The delivery lane could already be watched. Fiona had only one remaining route, the old coal chutes. Most had been sealed. One, according to maintenance plans she had seen during a drainage survey years earlier, opened into a bricked alcove beneath the side pavement. It had not been used in half a century, but it had not been fully filled. The building had been too old, the budget too small, and the paperwork too broad to finish the job. A voice echoed behind her. "Mrs. Gallagher," Daniel Price. He had followed her below. She did not answer. The coal passage narrowed. Her shoulder brushed brick. Dust caught in her throat. Above, the alarm continued its steady mechanical cry. But down here it became muffled, almost subterranean, like the memory of danger rather than danger itself. Fiona reached the iron railing at the chute corridor and stopped. The gate was secured with an old padlock. For a second, the sight emptied her mind. Then she remembered Sheila's key. Her fingers fumbled inside her coat pocket. The key ring slipped once, clattered against the brick floor, and the sound seemed to echo forever. Footsteps were closer now. Not running exactly, confident enough not to hurry. Price's voice came again, nearer. "You are making this much worse for yourself." Fiona found the key. It entered the padlock only halfway. She withdrew it, turned it, tried again. The lock resisted with the stubbornness of old metal and old neglect. "Mrs. Gallagher," Price said, "there is no heroic ending here. There is only a disciplinary matter becoming a criminal matter." The key turned. The padlock opened. Fiona pushed through the gate and shut it behind her. It would not hold him long, but it made a sound. It marked the distance between them. The chute alcove lay ahead, low and black. She had to crouch to enter. The walls were rough with soot. Her torch revealed a sloping brick channel, half blocked by debris, leading upward toward a metal hatch rimmed with old mortar. Rainwater had seeped through somewhere, making the bricks slick. She placed the vellum inside the waterproof document pouch with Rory's map and the borrower's card. Then she pushed the pouch into the front of her coat and began to climb. It was ugly work. Her knees struck brick. Her palms slid in dirt. The overnight bag snagged behind her, and she had to twist painfully to free it. Once, the toe of her shoe slipped, and she slid back several inches, scraping her wrist. Pain flashed up her arm, sharp and immediate. She swallowed the sound before it became a cry. Below, the gate rattled. Price had reached it. "You cannot even interpret what you have," he called up after her. "You're being used by frightened people covering their own negligence." Fiona paused, breathing hard in the chute darkness. For one dangerous moment, the words found their mark. Alistair had not been innocent. Moira had admitted her signature. The documents were incomplete. Fiona was not an engineer. What if she misunderstood? What if she was carrying fragments toward public damage, panic, ruin? Then she thought of the stolen card returned with a death threat. If she was wrong, why had they needed fear? She climbed again. At the top, the hatch would not move. Fiona pressed her shoulder against it. Nothing. She shifted, braced her feet against opposite sides of the chute, and pushed upward with both hands. Rust flaked into her face. The hatch groaned but held. Below her, metal struck metal as Price worked at the gate or forced it. Another voice joined his. Time was collapsing. She pushed again. The hatch lifted half an inch. Cold, rain-scented air entered the chute. She pushed a third time, not with strength exactly, but with the accumulated fury of every forged signature, every missing report, Every polite threat, every institution that had allowed delay to disguise itself as caution. The hatch shifted, scraped stone, and opened enough for her to force one arm through. A hand seized her wrist from above. Fiona nearly screamed. "It's me," Sheila hissed. Fiona looked up into the rain and the narrow, pale shape of Sheila's face above the pavement alcove. "Give me your other hand." Between them, with no dignity and considerable pain, Fiona emerged from the old coal chute into the side lane behind the library. Her coat was filthy, one sleeve torn, her hair greyed with dust. Sheila pulled her into the shadow beside the wall and lowered the hatch as far as it would go. "Do you have it?" Sheila whispered. Fiona pressed a hand to her coat. "Yes." "Then move." They did not run at first. They walked quickly, turning away from the flashing lights at the front of the building, past bins and a locked delivery shutter, through a narrow passage toward the next street. Behind them, someone shouted from inside the building. The side lane remained empty for 3 blessed seconds. Then Daniel Price emerged from the staff door at the far end. He saw them. For once, he looked neither polite nor controlled. Sheila grabbed Fiona's arm and pulled her into the street. A taxi was passing slowly through the rain, its light on. Sheila stepped into the road with the reckless authority of a woman who had raised 3 children and feared very little after midnight. The taxi braked. They climbed in. "Where to?" the driver asked. Fiona opened her mouth and almost said home. Then she remembered Rory's warning. Do not bring them back to the library. Do not return to safe places already known. She took out her notebook, found the name Moira had given her, and spoke with a steadiness she did not feel. "Waverley Station first," she said. "Then we decide." The taxi pulled away as Daniel Price reached the curb. Only when the library disappeared behind rain and traffic did Fiona open the document pouch. The vellum was there, the borrower's card was there, Rory's 1982 survey copy was there. But tucked between the sheets, folded into a narrow strip, was something else. A page torn from Alistair's own notebook. Fiona recognized the handwriting instantly. At the top he had written, "I was wrong about Ewan." Beneath it, in darker ink, as if added later, were the words that made every previous explanation fracture. "Weatherby is not protecting his son's death. He is hiding what Ewan discovered before he died." At Waverley Station, the city did not look frightened. It looked tired, wet, and brightly indifferent. Trains sighed beneath the glass roof. Suitcases rattled over the concourse tiles. A man in a business coat argued softly into his phone near the ticket barriers, while a group of students sat on the floor eating crisps from a shared bag. Announcements rose and dissolved in the high metal space, names of towns and platforms echoing above people who had their own destinations, their own delays, their own small emergencies. Fiona Gallagher stood near a closed coffee kiosk with soot on her coat, blood drying at her wrist, and Alistair Kerr's last surviving note in her hand. "I was wrong about Ewan. Weatherby is not protecting his son's death. He is hiding what Ewan discovered before he died." The words had altered the shape of the entire investigation. Until then, Ewan Weatherby's death had seemed like a hidden wound in Graham Weatherby's past, perhaps the source of shame, grief, or leverage. A son lost on a redevelopment site. A father determined to keep old questions buried. It had been a terrible possibility, but humanly understandable in a dark way. Now the note suggested something colder. Ewan had not merely died at Northbank Quarter, he had found something there. Sheila sat beside Fiona on a metal bench, one hand wrapped around a paper cup of tea that had gone untouched. Her face was drawn, her hair damp from the rain, but her eyes remained sharp. "Read the rest again," she said. Fiona unfolded the torn page carefully. The writing below was rushed, uneven in places, as if Alistair had written while moving or while listening for someone at a door. EW accessed sea-level temporary works after sample discrepancy, not authorized by GW. Report says fall from platform. Moira says no platform installed at that bay. Ask why test cores vanished same week. Ask why assurance file revised after funeral. If I disappear, take originals to Armitage. Do not give them to Edinburgh office. Fiona read the final line twice. Take originals to Armitage, not copies, not summaries. Originals. She looked down at the document pouch. The vellum, the borrower's card, Rory's survey copy, and Alistair's torn note were important. But the core samples remained beneath Northbank Quarter. Without them, Price could still argue interpretation. Weatherby could call the maps obsolete, the note unstable, the photograph misleading, the crack superficial, or already remediated. A city did not halt a billion-pound development because a suspended librarian emerged from a coal chute with old paper and a theory. It would halt for material evidence. Concrete did not care about reputation. Concrete either met strength or it did not. Fiona checked the time. Just after 10. Northbank Quarter, though not officially open, had active security, contractors, and overnight finishing crews. The public plazas were fenced. The residential towers rose dark and half-lit beyond the rail lines, their windows catching reflections from cranes and temporary floodlights. Somewhere beneath them lay the sea-level parking deck, the old culvert alignment, and a maintenance void that might contain the cause Moira had described. Sheila watched Fiona's expression change. "No," she said. Fiona did not answer. "Absolutely not. We have the coordinate. We have enough to go to Armitage. Enough to ask her to listen, not enough to force action before they move the samples." Sheila leaned closer. "You just crawled out of a coal chute while Daniel Price chased you through a fire alarm. That is usually the universe's way of suggesting a pause." Fiona looked across the station. A child in a red coat slept against his mother's shoulder. An old man studied a departure board with solemn confusion. Ordinary lives surrounded them, fragile not because people were weak, but because they trusted bridges, floors, tunnels, staircases, towers, the invisible competence of strangers. "They staged the alarm to take the originals," Fiona said. "Now they know we still have them. If the cores are where Alistair thought, they'll move them tonight. And if this is exactly what they want, to pull you somewhere isolated, it may be. That is not reassuring." "No." Fiona folded the note. "But if Ewan found the discrepancy before he died, then his death may have been used to frighten everyone else into silence. Or his death may have been an accident that made the silence easier. We do not know. We cannot claim more than we know, but the samples can tell part of the truth without needing courage." Sheila closed her eyes briefly. "I hate when you become reasonable about madness." Fiona took out her phone and for the first time called a number Moira had given in a previous message, but warned her not to use unless there was no other route. It rang 5 times, then a voice answered, low and wary. "Who is this?" "Moira, it's Fiona Gallagher. I have the grid, I have the card, I have Alistair's note about Ewan." Silence. Then Moira said, "Where are you?" "Waverley." "Leave, now. We need to know whether the maintenance access is still reachable." "No." "Moira, no. You listen to me. Alistair thought the samples were still there because he saw the old register before it was altered. But he never reached the void. Ewan did." Fiona's grip tightened around the phone. "What did Ewan discover?" Moira's breathing became audible. "Not just bad concrete. Substitution. The approved core set was clean. The installed batch was not the batch certified. Someone swapped identifiers between test samples and poured material. Ewan noticed the numbering sequence didn't match the delivery logs. He told his father. 2 days later, he was dead." Sheila lowered the teacup slowly. "Are you saying Graham Weatherby killed his son?" Fiona asked. "No," Moira said sharply. "Do not say that. Do not even think it unless you can prove it. I'm saying Ewan found something that would have stopped the project and destroyed several careers. His death stopped the questions. Whether by accident, negligence, panic, or something worse, I don't know. I never knew." Fiona absorbed the correction. It mattered. Even now, especially now, the difference between suspicion and proof had to hold. "Can you get us inside?" she asked. Moira was quiet for so long, Fiona thought the call had dropped. Then she said, "There is an old service access off the temporary contractor route near the east hoarding. It was used for drainage inspection before the lower deck was sealed. If the lock hasn't been changed, the code may still be on the underside of the cover plate. You know this because I put it there," Moira said. "Years ago. In case I ever stopped being a coward." By 11:15, Fiona and Sheila were standing in the rain beside the eastern hoarding of Northbank Quarter. The development rose above them in dark plains of glass and concrete. Marketing banners snapped against metal fencing, promising a new district for a new Edinburgh. Floodlights washed unfinished pavements in white glare. Beyond the barriers, 3 high-rise towers stood almost complete, their upper floors lit by work lamps and security strips. From a distance, they looked sleek, inevitable. Up close, Fiona could hear the unfinished building breathe, generators humming, loose plastic flapping, water dripping from scaffold joints, the low metallic clank of something moving in the wind. Moira emerged from the shadow of a service gate wearing a dark waterproof coat and carrying a hard hat tucked under one arm. She was older than Fiona expected, with a lined face, cropped grey hair, and the blunt posture of someone who had spent too many years in rooms where men interrupted her until the evidence failed in their hands. "You shouldn't have come," she said. "You did," Fiona replied. Moira gave a tired, almost approving look. "That doesn't make either of us wise." She led them through a gap between hoardings, across a strip of temporary matting, and down a concrete ramp into the unfinished underground parking level. The air changed immediately. It smelled of damp cement, diesel, metal, and trapped rainwater. Their footsteps echoed too widely. Painted arrows pointed toward future exits. Electric cables hung bundled along the ceiling. The pillars stood in rows, numbered in black and yellow, some wrapped in protective padding, deeming some exposed. C7 was marked with temporary cladding. N4 stood behind a barrier. K13 was beyond a chain-link partition. Fiona stopped when she saw them. The vellum had made them symbols. The underground space made them real. Moira pointed toward the far wall. The old culvert runs beyond that service bay. The access point should be behind the storage partition. They crossed the deck quickly. "Please." Sheila kept looking back. Fiona did too. Every sound seemed to arrive with intent. The cover plate was exactly where Moira said it would be, half hidden behind stacked insulation boards. Moira crouched, felt beneath its lower edge, and gave a short, bitter laugh. Still there. She entered 4 digits into a rusted keypad mounted beside the service hatch. Nothing happened. Then, with a soft mechanical click, the lock released. The maintenance void beyond was low, narrow, and black. Fiona's torch beam caught old brick, modern concrete, and a line of sealed plastic sample tubes stacked in a crate beneath a tarpaulin. Each tube bore faded labels, batch identifiers, and handwritten chain markings. For a moment, no one spoke. The most important proof in the entire investigation had been waiting under the city, not buried by earth, but buried by the confidence that no one would look in the right forgotten place. Moira stepped forward and lifted one of the tubes with both hands. Her face changed as she read the label. "This is it," she whispered. "This is the failed batch." Then a voice behind them said, "Put it down, Miss Lennox." Graham Weatherby stood at the entrance to the service bay. He looked older than in the photographs, his silver hair damp from the rain, his expression not angry but hollowed out, as though some part of him had been expecting this moment for years. Daniel Price stood beside him with 2 security men behind. Weatherby's eyes moved from Moira to Fiona, then to the sample tube. "You have no idea what you are holding," he said. Fiona looked at the crate, then at him. "Then explain it in front of the Safety Commission." Price took a step forward. "This has gone far enough." "No," Moira said, still holding the core. "It went far enough when Ewan found the swapped identifiers." Weatherby flinched. The name struck him physically. For the first time, Fiona saw not a polished consultant or a possible villain, but a father whose grief had been twisted around something unspoken until it became indistinguishable from guilt. "You don't get to say his name," Weatherby said. Moira's voice shook. "He came to me before he came to you. He knew. He had the delivery logs." Weatherby stared at her. That detail seemed to wound him differently. "He came to you?" The silence that followed was terrible. Fiona understood then that even Weatherby might not possess the full truth he had spent years hiding. He had hidden the aftermath, perhaps, protected the firm, protected the project, protected himself from knowing whether his son's death had been preventable. But he had not known everything Ewan had done before he died. Price saw the hesitation and moved to fill it. "Mr. Weatherby, do not engage. These materials are disputed property. We remove them now and address this through counsel." Fiona stepped sideways, placing herself between Price and the crate. Sheila, after one horrified second, did the same. "You cannot take them," Fiona said. Price's voice hardened. "You are trespassing on a construction site with stolen documents. And you are attempting to remove physical evidence related to public safety," Fiona replied. The words echoed across the concrete deck. From somewhere above, a vehicle reversed, its warning tone faint and distant. Weatherby looked at the pillars, then at the crate. His face seemed to age in the space of a breath. "Ewan said the numbers didn't match," he murmured. Price turned sharply. "Graham." "He said the numbers didn't match," Weatherby repeated, as if hearing his son across years of denial. "I told him to leave it alone until I reviewed the file." Moira's eyes filled. "He didn't leave it alone." "No," Weatherby said. "He never did." Price reached for the sample tube in Moira's hands. Fiona moved without thinking. She stepped between them, not forcefully enough to be heroic, only firmly enough to interrupt. Price's hand struck her shoulder. She stumbled back against the crate. One of the core tubes rolled free, hit the concrete, and cracked its outer casing with a sharp, unmistakable snap. Everyone froze. Inside the broken casing, beneath layers of old plastic and dust, the concrete core was visible. A label sealed within the inner sleeve carried two identifiers, one printed, one hand-written beneath it. They did not match. Moira stared at it. "There," she said. "There it is." Weatherby looked down at the exposed label, and whatever defense remained in him seemed to drain away. Price did not wait. He lunged toward the crate. Sheila swung her paper cup into his face. It was absurd, ineffective, and perfectly timed. Price recoiled, cursing, tea splashing across his coat. Fiona grabbed the broken core casing and shoved it into the document pouch. Moira lifted two more tubes. Sheila seized Fiona's arm. "Move!" They ran toward the ramp. This time, there was no pretending. Security shouted. Footsteps pounded behind them. Somewhere above, someone called for the gate to be closed. The underground deck threw every sound back at them twice. Fiona's lungs burned. Her scraped wrist throbbed. The sample tube struck against the pouch with each step like a hard second heart. At the top of the ramp, headlights swept across the hoarding. For one sick instant, Fiona thought another vehicle had arrived to block them. Then she saw the markings on the side. A white van with the seal of the Independent Structural Safety Commission. A woman in a dark coat stepped out, accompanied by two inspectors in hard hats. She was in her 60s, tall, severe, with cropped white hair, and the unmistakable authority of someone who had spent a career not being easily moved by powerful men. Moira almost collapsed with relief. "Dr. Armitage," she called. Helen Armitage looked from Moira to Fiona, then past them to the men emerging from the underground deck. "I received a scan from Mr. Anstruther," she said, "and 3 rather alarming messages from people who apparently think midnight is an acceptable filing deadline." Daniel Price stopped at the ramp entrance. For the first time since Fiona had met him, he looked unsure of the room he was in. Dr. Armitage held out a gloved hand. Fiona gave her the document pouch. Inside were the vellum, the borrower's card, the survey copy, Alistair's note, and the cracked core casing with its mismatched identifiers. Dr. Armitage examined the visible label through the plastic. Her face did not change much, but her voice did. "Nobody touches that crate," she said to her inspectors. "Seal the bay, photograph everything, log every sample in place before removal." Price began. "Dr. Armitage, with respect." "With respect," she said without raising her voice. "If you interfere with potential evidence in a structural safety matter, I will make sure your name is the first one in my report." The rain fell harder, hissing against the floodlit concrete. Graham Weatherby stood at the ramp entrance, staring not at the inspectors, nor at Price, nor even at the crate being sealed behind him. He was staring at the broken sample casing in Dr. Armitage's hand. Fiona thought he might speak. Instead, he lowered himself slowly onto the wet curb, as if his legs had finally surrendered the weight his conscience had carried for years. The truth had not fully emerged, not yet. It would be tested, challenged, delayed, attacked and translated into reports by people who knew how to make danger sound conditional. But it had crossed the one boundary Price had tried so desperately to defend. It had left the hidden place, and once evidence enters the open air, even the powerful cannot always teach it to be silent again. The first public notice appeared 3 days later. printed in careful language and placed where no one could mistake it for panic. The opening of Northbank Quarter would be postponed pending an independent structural review. That was all most people saw at first. A delay, a review, a statement from the development group expressing full cooperation, a comment from the council assuring residents that public safety remained the highest priority, a brief interview with a transport reporter standing in the rain outside the hoarding, explaining that some access roads would remain closed while engineers assessed an unspecified concern below ground level. Unspecified concern. Fiona Gallagher read those words at her kitchen table, one wrist bandaged, a mug of tea cooling beside her, and felt the strange exhaustion that follows danger when danger has not quite ended. The city had not transformed overnight. No minister had stood in front of cameras admitting failure. No executive had confessed into a microphone. No single document had solved everything cleanly. Real truth did not arrive like that. It moved through chain of custody forms, interim reports, sealed evidence bags, engineering tests, legal caution, and sentences revised until every word could survive attack. But the site was closed. That mattered. The three towers no longer glowed at night with work lights. The crane stood still above the old rail lands. Security fencing was doubled. Commission vans came and went through the eastern gate. Men and women in hard hats entered with clipboards, scanners, sample cases, and the somber expressions of people trained to distrust surfaces. C7, N4, and K13 were no longer just marks on a vellum overlay. They were inspection zones. The concrete cores were removed under supervision. The crate in the maintenance void was photographed where it had been found. The mismatched identifiers were logged. The old survey grid from Rory Ann Struthers' reference copy was entered as contextual evidence, then traced back to the sealed municipal file in Sighthill. The 1974 subsurface report was recovered 2 days later from a private records box incorrectly transferred under an internal facilities code. Incorrectly transferred. That was the first phrase used. Later, when investigators found the access request had been backdated and attached to a contractor number linked to a dormant compliance account, the phrase changed. Unlawfully removed. Fiona noticed the difference. She kept both notices in a folder. Daniel Price was arrested 6 weeks later, though not for everything Fiona had expected. The initial charges concerned evidence interference, intimidation, unlawful access to a public archive, and obstruction of a safety investigation. The larger questions took longer. Cairnwell Urban Properties issued statements through solicitors denying institutional knowledge of any misconduct. Northbank Development Group suspended several senior contractors. 2 council officials stepped aside pending review. A director resigned for personal reasons. Another insisted he had acted in good faith on the information available at the time. Good faith, Fiona had learned, was another phrase that needed foundations beneath it. Graham Weatherby did not disappear. He gave evidence behind closed doors first, then later in a preliminary hearing that drew a crowd of reporters into a room too small for the weight of what was being discussed. Fiona attended one morning and sat near the back beside Sheila. Weatherby looked diminished, not innocent, not monstrous, diminished. A man reduced from polished authority to the smaller, more terrible shape of what he had allowed himself not to know. He did not claim the buildings were safe. He did not claim Alistair was unstable. He did not accuse Moira of fabrication. When asked about his son, he removed his glasses and was silent for so long that the chair of the hearing repeated the question. Finally, he said, "Ewan came to me with a discrepancy. I told myself I was preventing reputational damage until I had verified it. I was also preventing myself from hearing him. It was not a confession to killing. It was not proof of intent." It did not answer every question around Ewan's fall. The official inquiry into his death was reopened, but Fiona understood from the beginning that some truths might remain partial. Not every silence breaks just because light reaches it. Some are held in missing minutes, in destroyed phones, in memories altered by shame, and in the dead, who cannot clarify what the living have spent years misquoting. Alistair Kerr was found alive in a rented room outside Perth. He had been ill, frightened, and far less in control than his ciphers had made him seem. When Fiona saw him weeks later in a quiet hospital visiting room, he looked older than the man who once sat beneath the archive window, with a thermos and sharpened pencils. Morag sat beside him, holding his hand with the exhausted authority of someone who had chosen anger and love at the same time. Alistair apologized before Fiona had fully entered the room. "I used you," he said. Fiona took the chair opposite him. "Yes." Morag gave a small, startled laugh through her tears. Alistair closed his eyes. "I thought if I left the trail in books, it would be safer, slower, harder to erase." "It was harder to erase," Fiona said. "It was not safer." "No." He opened his eyes then. They were wet, but steady. "I should have spoken years ago." Fiona looked at him for a long moment. There were many things she could have said. That fear was understandable. That systems punished people who spoke too soon and too alone. That guilt arriving late was still better than silence. All of those were true, but none of them was complete. "Yes," she said finally, "you should have." He nodded as if the sentence had been deserved, and, because it was deserved, merciful. Moira Lennox gave testimony under protection after 2 attempts were made to discredit her professional history. She did not present herself as a heroine. Fiona respected that. Moira spoke plainly about the compliance note she had signed, the pressure she had felt, the warnings she had ignored, and the moment she realized that keeping her career had not kept her safe from herself. Her testimony did not absolve her. It made the record harder to tidy. Rory Anstruther became briefly famous among archivists, which he described as the worst kind of fame, because everyone wants you to explain metadata at lunch. He refused television interviews, but wrote a furious article about the destruction of paper trails, which Fiona clipped and saved. Sheila was suspended for 9 working days and reinstated with a reprimand that she framed and hung above her desk. Fiona's own administrative leave lasted longer. There were meetings, statements, union representatives, apologies that avoided admitting why they were necessary, and one senior official who told her the council appreciated her commitment but hoped she understood the importance of process. Fiona replied that process was only admirable when it did not become a carpet under which urgent things were swept. She returned to the library in early spring. The first morning back, she arrived before opening as she always had. The city was pale with cold light. Rain had washed the pavements clean. The carved owls above the entrance looked less severe than she remembered, though stone, of course, had not changed. Sheila had left flowers on the archive desk in a chipped mug. Marcus had placed a handwritten sign near the staff kettle. No corporate espionage before tea. Fiona stood alone for a while in the north reading room. Alistair's table had been repaired where old tape marks scarred the underside. The engineering shelves had been audited, reorganized, and given a new restricted access procedure that somehow managed to be both more secure and more irritating. The vellum overlay was no longer there. It had been sealed as evidence, along with the borrower's card, the cracked core casing, the copied survey, and Alistair's torn note. Yet Fiona could still see it when she closed her eyes. Thin lines floating over a map, circles settling over pillars, a hidden warning waiting inside a book no one wanted to read. The library felt different now, not ruined, not innocent either. It felt like a fortress built of fragile things. In the months that followed, people came to the archive with new seriousness. Journalists requested access to old planning files. Residents asked about buildings near their homes. Students wrote dissertations on public records, safety and trust. Some came only to see the place where it had begun, as if danger left a stain that could be visited. Fiona disliked that part. She did not want myth. Myth made people careless in a different direction. It turned labor into legend and evidence into atmosphere. So when visitors asked whether she had known immediately that the city was in danger, she told the truth. No. She had known only that something was out of place. A missing slip, a strange overlay, a pattern of holes, a retired man who stopped coming to the library. That was how most truths began, not as thunder, but as a detail refusing to disappear. The inquiry would continue for years. The towers would remain fenced until engineers decided whether they could be repaired or whether parts must come down. Ewan Weatherby's final hours would be examined again, though no one could promise his family a clean answer. Alistair would never fully escape his guilt. Moira would never fully escape hers. Fiona would never again believe that quiet meant safety. But one evening, after the archive closed and the last reader left, She walked through the stacks alone and felt something steadier than peace. The books had held, not perfectly, not easily, but long enough. She stopped beside the engineering section and rested her hand on the shelf where the concrete volume had once sat. Outside, rain began again against the high windows, soft and persistent, the old sound of Edinburgh keeping its secrets and, sometimes, surrendering them. Somewhere in the city, beneath stone and glass and ambition, the ground remembered everything placed upon it. And on a shelf, in a drawer, inside a margin, or folded between pages, there might still be another warning waiting for the one person patient enough to read it. If this story kept you watching until the end, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment with your thoughts, and share the video with someone who believes quiet places have nothing dangerous to say.